Chapter 4009. The god of the underworld didn't want to use a weapon because of his status. He thought that even if Ji Tianxing was a bit stronger than the average peak divine king, he could still defeat him with his bare hands. But it turned out that Ji Tianxing was not only powerful, but also had a supreme-grade divine artifact. If he didn't use a weapon, he might not be able to kill Ji Tianxing. That would be too embarrassing. For his dignity, the god of the underworld had to use the sword of death. Heavens will destroy. The god of the underworld held a divine art with his left hand and waved the sword of death with his right hand. He slashed at Ji Tianxing slowly. He wasn't fast, but the sword of death released a dark blade aura with the cold energy of death. It fell from the sky and slashed at Ji Tianxing. This was the god of the underworld's second divine power, which also contained the power of the heavenly way. Ji Tianxing found something interesting. It was unknown whether the Netherworld Divine Emperor had deliberately slowed down his moves for the sake of solemnity, so as to appear neutral and peaceful, representing the will of the heavenly Tao. Or was it because the god of the underworld couldn't use the power of the heavenly way as freely as normal divine arts? In short, the Netherworld Divine Emperor performed two heavenly Tao secret arts. Both of them were done at a steady pace, as if the heavenly might had descended. Ji Tianxing had just waved the divine sword and stopped the attack of the three divine kings. When he saw the blade aura of death fall from the sky, he was immediately enveloped by the invisible power of the heavenly way and his body was a bit bent. The god of the underworld had used all his strength this time. The energy of death in the dark blade aura was also very strong and cold. Ji Tianxing used all the power of the indestructible golden body and straightened his back. He wanted to teleport away, but he found that the space around him was locked and he couldn't escape. The god of the underworld had also locked onto his soul. No matter how he ran, there was no way he could escape from this sword. With no other choice, Ji Tianxing could only wield the Burial of Heaven sword and unleash his ultimate skill with all his might to block the deathly sword light. Heavenly Dragon World / He held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and slashed out a huge golden sword with all his strength, slashing towards the pitch-black sword light from below. Boom! The gigantic dragon-shaped sword that was thousands of feet long collided with the pitch-black deathly sword light with a loud clang. However, the dragon-shaped sword collapsed on the spot, turning into fragments that scattered all over the sky. As for the pitch-black sword light of death, it was still intact, but its power had been weakened by 40%. Shwa! The deathly sword light sped down and arrived above Ji Tianxing's head. Ji Tianxing was about to be sliced in half by the deathly sword light, and his godhead would be corroded by the deathly cold air and be severely injured. At this moment of life and death, Ji Tianxing knew that the sword of Burial of Heaven couldn't stop the god of the underworld. After all, the sword of Burial of Heaven was only a king-level superior-grade divine artifact. It could deal with a peak godly king, but it couldn't deal with the incarnation of the god of the underworld. Therefore he decisively took out his divine hammer, infused it with violent divine power, and smashed it against the deathly sword light. Boom! Dazzling five-colored lightning burst forth from the divine hammer, exploding with a power that could destroy everything as it violently smashed into the deathly sword light. With a deafening shattering sound, the pitch-black sword light was finally smashed into pieces and dissipated on the spot. The divine hammer also buzzed from the impact, and the five-colored lightning kept flashing. The destructive shockwave carried countless shards of divine light as it spread out in all directions. The three godly kings of the god race were sent flying by the terrifying shockwave, and blood spurted out of their mouths and noses. Ji Tianxing was also sent flying hundreds of miles, and he took the opportunity to get away from the god of the underworld. The space within thousands of miles was also shattered by the shockwave, revealing a large patch of pitch-black void. The second move of the god of the underworld was once again neutralized by Ji Tianxing, and Ji Tianxing was unscathed. This made the god of the underworld frown, and his eyes flashed with a cold light, revealing a shocked expression. You actually have a second supreme-grade divine artifact? As a god emperor, he obviously knew how rare a king-level supreme-grade divine artifact was. It was an extravagant hope for an ordinary peak godly king to obtain one. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, actually had two supreme-grade divine artifacts. In this way he could be said to be invincible under the god emperor realm. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to adjust his breathing, and he looked at the god of the underworld with a cold smile. I already knew that you would come. Since I dared to meet and fight you, how could I not be confident? Very good. The god of the underworld frowned again and his eyes became even colder. Supreme-grade divine artifacts are indeed powerful, but I am already a godly king. No matter how many supreme-grade divine artifacts you have, it is useless. The god of the underworld roared and he swung the sword of death again, striking out 6 consecutive sword radiances. 6 paths of reincarnation. The 6 sword radiances were as black as ink and they were thousands of feet long, and they contained a bone-chilling aura of death. The sword radiances were arranged in a special way, and they contained the power of the heavenly way of reincarnation. They fell from the sky and pierced toward Ji Tianxing. Enveloped by the sword light with Ji Tianxing as the center, the space within a 100-mile radius shattered inch by inch. After the space was shattered, a pitch-black void appeared. It was as if endless darkness was surging toward Ji Tianxing, trying to swallow him whole. He was in the darkness and there was no way for him to escape. However, he did not panic. First, he swung the divine hammer, striking out dozens of lightning pillars to block the attacks of the 3 godly kings. Then he swung the divine hammer, striking out hundreds of light blades with all his might. He released 300 divine Tao laws to block the 6 paths of reincarnation. Kaboom! Bam bam bam. After the earth-shattering collisions there were continuous explosions. After the hundreds of powerful light blades hit the 6 paths of reincarnation, they all collapsed and countless fragments of divine light exploded. Although all the light blades had collapsed, the 6 pitch-black sword radiances had not dissipated. However, the power of the sword radiances had been reduced by half, and their speed was also greatly reduced. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing held the divine hammer with both hands and used it as a divine sword, using a supreme skill. Sword of Annihilation. As he roared, he drew on the boundless power of the world and swung the divine hammer, striking out a brilliant golden sword that was tens of thousands of feet long. The giant sword that could split heaven and earth apart and destroy everything contained the power of the world and 300 divine Tao laws. It struck the 6 paths of reincarnation with a loud boom. With a loud boom, the 6 paths of reincarnation sword was destroyed. Although the tens of thousands of feet long sword of annihilation did not collapse, its power and speed were reduced by more than half. It continued to strike toward the god of the underworld. Seeing the sword radiances coming toward him, the god of the underworld raised his eyebrows, and a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. This is the power of the world. Kenshin, you have refined an entire world and can use the power of the world. The god of the underworld looked at Ji Tianxing in surprise, and his voice was filled with disbelief. As a god emperor, he naturally knew how powerful the power of the world was. If his 6 paths of reincarnation represented death, then the power of the world represented new life. These 2 powers had different attributes and meanings, but they were the same level of power of the heavenly Tao. These were powers that ordinary godly kings could not control. Chapter 40:10. After a few exchanges, the god of the underworld saw Ji Tianxing in a different light. Even though the divine Tao laws that Ji Tianxing executed were unable to pose a threat to him. But the power of the world was strong enough to break through his defense. This made the god of the underworld even more cautious. After the 6 paths of reincarnation sword was destroyed, Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to escape from the boundless darkness. He retreated 20,000 miles into the sky and waved his hammer again, attacking the 3 god kings with all his might. The 3 god race god kings were intimidated by the terrifying power and retreated one after another. But they were too slow and were immediately enveloped by a few light blades. They were about to be killed on the spot. At this moment, the god of the underworld roared and teleported. Kenshin, don't be so arrogant. The god of the underworld appeared in front of the 3 god kings in a flash. He clapped his left hand and a black wind appeared. It carried the power of the heavenly Tao and shattered a few light blades. He waved the sword of death in his right hand and slashed out 2 pitch-black sword lights that were 10,000 feet long. They slashed at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was forced to retreat. He waved his hammer with all his might to block the giant sword. Kaboom! With a loud bang, the giant sword shattered Ji Tianxing's attack and sent him flying 1,000 miles away. The 3 god kings were also out of danger. They quickly ran behind the god of the underworld. Seeing this, the god of the underworld's eyes darkened. he said in a low voice. Kenshin's strength is extraordinary. You can't deal with him. Yanjiu, stay. The rest of you return to the ship to heal. The Yanjiu he was talking about was the peak god king. He was the god of the underworld's confidant. 1,200 years ago, when he was still a 7th-level god king, he was taken in as a disciple by the god of the underworld. Hearing the god of the underworld's order, the 2 injured god kings and the 2 alien god kings' godheads entered the god of the underworld's ship. After entering the divine ship, they all heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Indeed, with their strength of 9th-level god kings, they were not a threat to Ji Tianxing. They were in great danger. When Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld fought, the aftershocks of the battle could injure them. Other than the peak god king Yanjiu, they were not qualified to participate in this battle. In the god of the underworld's avatar was Yanjiu of the underworld's avatar. The battle just now had destroyed everything within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The mountains and forests were all in ruins. Even the sky within tens of thousands of miles had become fragmented and filled with pitch-black void. The god of the underworld's eyes darkened. He swung his sword at Ji Tianxing again. Yanjiu did not dare to show any fear or worry. He charged at Ji Tianxing without any regard for his own safety. He used all kinds of skills and techniques. Ji Tianxing fought and retreated at the same time. He did not show any weakness. After exchanging another 10 moves with the god of the underworld, he was completely relieved. Reality proved that his previous deduction was correct. The god of the underworld's avatar was stronger than a god king, but he was not a true god emperor. At least he was a threat to him, but he did not have an overwhelming advantage. As long as he was careful, he would not be in danger. Rumble. Bam bam bam. The 3 experts were still fighting high up in the sky, and the battlefield spanned tens of thousands of miles. Everywhere it passed, the sky would shatter and be occupied by boundless darkness. A void storm would rise. The ground and mountains were also in ruins. The ground was full of ditches and pits. Smoke and dust rose everywhere. A deafening sound reverberated between heaven and earth. The intense and dazzling light of the divine techniques alerted the mutated tribe powerhouses hundreds of thousands of miles away. Many mutated tribe guards approached carefully and watched the battle from afar. The capture of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and the death of all the God Kings had scared the hell out of these guards. However, when they saw Ji Tianxing being attacked by the god of the underworld and Yanjiu, they all smiled excitedly. Many people cheered and shouted in surprise. They were not stupid. They immediately guessed the identity of the god of the underworld and Yanjiu. Everyone look. The Lord Supreme is here. Haha. This is great. The Lord Supreme is here to save us. We are saved. That bastard is about to be killed by the Lord Supreme. Many of the guards roared with joy as they passed on the good news to the others. Soon most of the guards heard the news. The crowd was in a state of joy and excitement. As time passed, the battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld became more and more intense. The 3 of them moved hundreds of thousands of miles away from the battlefield. They were getting closer and closer to the ruins of the divine radiance grotto heaven. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and Yanjiu were both severely injured. Only the god of the underworld was unharmed. In comparison, Yanjiu's injuries were more miserable and serious, while Ji Tianxing's injuries were lighter and not serious. When the god of the underworld swung his sword at Ji Tianxing again, Ji Tianxing saw Yanjiu's weakness. Therefore he used the protection of the indestructible golden body to resist the sword light of the god of the underworld and attacked Yanjiu with all his might. Sword of Destruction. In order to hit Yanjiu, Ji Tianxing used the power of the world again and attacked Yanjiu fiercely. When Yanjiu felt the terrifying power of the world and saw the sword light coming, he instinctively wanted to retreat. Unfortunately, the space around him was sealed. His speed of escape was extremely slow. Before he could retreat more than 10,000 feet, the sword light drowned his body. Bang! Kaboom! The first loud sound was from Yanjiu being hit by the Sword of Destruction. His body exploded on the spot and blood splattered everywhere. Then Ji Tianxing was also hit by the god of the underworld's deadly sword light. He rolled and flew backward. Bang! Ji Tianxing was sent flying backward for 300 miles, smashing into the ground that seemed to be in ruins. Dust and smoke rose into the air. When he crawled out of the ruins, his hair was messy and his body was covered in blood. Blood was also dripping from his mouth and nose. Even the hazy golden light that enveloped his body had become much dimmer. However, he was not fatally injured. After using his power to suppress his injuries, he could continue fighting. On the other hand, Yanjio was in a much worse state. His divine body was destroyed by the sword of destruction and turned into a pile of flesh and blood. He only had one intact godhead left. He did not dare to fight anymore. He could only escape back to the god of the underworld's divine ship. Ever since Yanjio became a peak divine king, this was the first time he had suffered such a great loss. Even when he entered the divine ship, he still could not believe that his divine body was destroyed by Kenshin. As everyone knew, a divine king's body would need at least 100 years to recover. Even with the help of the god of the underworld, it would still take him 50 to 60 years. This result made Yanjio frustrated and depressed. He thought to himself, damn it. How could his strength be so strong? Now not only do I have to go into seclusion to heal, but I have also embarrassed myself in front of Master. Yanjio was not the only one who was shocked. The god of the underworld was too. He did not expect Ji Tianqing to be so daring. He dared to take his attack head-on and was not injured. He even destroyed Yanjio's body. Now the god of the underworld was fighting alone. He did not know if he could defeat Ji Tianqing. Chapter 40:11. Ji Tianqing and the god of the underworld exchanged dozens of blows. The two of them shattered the world within tens of thousands of miles, but it was still difficult to determine a winner. Neither of them could injure the other. Of course, both of them were using up a lot of their divine power and their strength was slowly declining. Ji Tianqing was fine. He could take divine pills to quickly replenish his divine power. The god of the underworld's avatar was a little embarrassed. He couldn't recover his divine power through cultivation or taking divine pills. His avatar was equivalent to a container that stored a lot of divine power. He could only use his divine power and not recharge it. At most, he could fight Ji Tianqing for a day before his divine power was exhausted. At that time, his divine power would be exhausted and unable to recover. He could only collapse. Therefore, the god of the underworld only wanted to end the battle quickly and kill Ji Tianqing as soon as possible. However, Ji Tianqing had the protection of a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact and rich combat experience. The two of them exchanged nearly 100 blows and shattered the world within tens of thousands of miles, but it was still difficult to determine a winner. Not to mention killing Ji Tianqing, the god of the underworld couldn't even injure Ji Tianqing. The only change was that the two of them were using up more energy and their strength was declining. The battlefield was moving closer and closer to the ruins of the divine palace. They were only about 30,000 miles away. Around the ruins, the tens of thousands of foreign race experts who were cheering finally began to panic. They clearly saw that several experts had besieged Ji Tianqing at the beginning. In the end, only a black-robed expert was left fighting Ji Tianqing. And judging from the situation, neither of them had the upper hand. It seemed that they were evenly matched. What made the crowd even more frightened and anxious was that the aftermath of the battle between Ji Tianqing and the god of the underworld was too terrifying. With the two of them as the center, a radius of 50,000 miles was enveloped by divine light. The shockwaves rippled out. The world was collapsing and shattering, occupied by the pitch-black void. The destructive shockwave flattened all the mountains and rivers, turning them into scorched earth and ruins. The tens of thousands of non-human experts were completely unable to withstand the onslaught of the shockwave. Many unlucky fellows were heavily wounded by the blast waves when they were still more than 40,000 miles away from the battlefield. Blood was spurting out of their orifices. When the others saw this, how could they dare to stay? When Ji Tianqing and the god of the underworld kept moving the battlefield closer and closer to the ruins of the divine palace, tens of thousands of powerful non-humankind beings hurriedly retreated deeper into the cave. These people's minds were somewhat conflicted, causing them to be hesitant in their actions. Not only did they have to avoid the shockwave, but they also wanted to see the result of the battle between Ji Tianqing and the god of the underworld. As such, they all retreated a certain distance. After they were temporarily safe, they stopped in the sky to watch the battle. When Ji Tianqing and the god of the underworld got closer, the shockwaves came and they continued to retreat into the depths of the grotto heaven. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. The god of the underworld attacked Ji Tianqing fiercely like a storm, but to no avail. He had expended 30% of his strength and his strength was beginning to weaken. However, Ji Tianqing was only slightly injured, which did not affect his battle. Although Ji Tianqing had also expended 30% of his divine power, he was slowly recovering with the help of the king-grade divine pills. At this point, the god of the underworld had no choice but to slow down the pace of his attacks and start to think about how to deal with Ji Tianqing. This damned guy is indeed stronger than before. And not just a little stronger but almost twice as strong. I don't know what kind of opportunity he had, but he actually has 3 king-grade divine artifacts. A protective treasure, a divine cauldron, and a divine hammer. With just this incarnation of mine and the sword of death, I really can't do anything to him. The god of the underworld pondered silently as he dealt with Ji Tianqing. His eyes were very dark and he was very irritated. His entire body was filled with burning murderous intent. Logically speaking, my incarnation can also use the power of the heavenly Tao. The power of the heavenly Tao has a natural suppressive effect on all living beings below the level of God Emperor, just like the punishment of the heavenly Tao. Therefore I should have the upper hand and suppress him in all aspects. However, the power of the heavenly Tao has no effect on him, nor does it have any obvious suppressive effect. What's going on? He's only a peak divine king and he hasn't mastered the power of the heavenly Tao, and he hasn't even broken through to the level of God Emperor. This shouldn't be happening. The god of the underworld frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly he thought of something and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Could it be the executioner painting? The executioner painting is not lost but in his hands? It's because of the executioner painting's protection that he is immune to the suppression of the heavenly Tao? Yes, that should be the reason. Back then the 5 god emperors besieged Kenshin to steal the executioner painting. They obtained the eternal heavenly book, which allowed them to see through the mysteries of the heavens and cultivate the power of the heavenly Tao beyond the level of divine kings. However, the eternal heavenly book and the executioner painting were one and the same. Both were the upper and lower parts, and they needed to be cultivated together to reach the end. As for what the end was, the 5 god emperors didn't know. They only cultivated the first half of the eternal heavenly book and became god emperors. They were above the rest of life and could replace Tianqing. This made them speculate that if they cultivated the executioner painting to perfection, they might be able to replace the heavenly Tao, or even become the heavenly Tao. Because of this, the 5 god emperors didn't give up on searching for the executioner painting after Kenshin fell. In the past they always thought that Kenshin had fallen, and the executioner painting must have been lost in the world. Perhaps it was in the heavenly realm or in the lower realm, but it was more likely that it was in the void. It was also for this reason that the 5 god emperors left the heavenly realm and went to the void. As for the mystery of the grey fog, it was a surprise they found while exploring the void in search of the executioner painting. The god of the underworld was the most shrewd and scheming. When the 5 god emperors couldn't find the whereabouts of the executioner painting after searching the void, he turned his attention to the lower realm. He was limited by the rules of the heavenly Tao and couldn't go down to the lower realm to search for it himself. However, he used the power of the God Emperor to interfere with the rules of the heavenly Tao and secretly support the Heaven Punishers in the lower realm. He wanted to cultivate the Heaven Punishers to have the power to sweep through the 3,000 realms and help him search the lower realm for the executioner painting. However, his scheme was about to succeed, but Ji Tianqing ruined it. Now the god of the underworld saw Ji Tianqing with his own eyes and knew that he was Kenshin's reincarnation. Now that the truth was out, the god of the underworld had enough reason to suspect that the executioner painting was still in Ji Tianqing's hands. At this time the god of the underworld exchanged another blow with Ji Tianqing. In the earth-shattering explosion, both of them were pushed back by the violent force. The god of the underworld suddenly shouted, "Kenshin, you have mastered the executioner painting?" What? Ji Tianqing had just retreated 100 miles away and was focused on thinking about how to deal with the god of the underworld's attack. Suddenly hearing this strange sentence, he couldn't help but be stunned. The god of the underworld stared at his reaction and asked without hesitation, "If you didn't master the executioner painting, how could you resist the power of the heavenly Tao and be on par with my clone?" Chapter 40:12. This time Ji Tianqing understood. He frowned, his pupils constricted, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He knew that the god of the underworld was beginning to suspect that he had the heaven-vanquishing formation. The two questions just now were merely probing questions from the god of the underworld. Of course, this was to be expected and Ji Tianqing was not surprised. The blood feud between him and the 5 god emperors was because of the eternal heavenly book and the heaven-vanquishing formation. The existence of these 2 treasures was no secret to the 6 of them. However, a normal person would think that the heaven-vanquishing formation would be lost in the world after Kenshin's death. Now that Kenshin had been reborn, he would definitely be searching for the heaven-vanquishing formation. However, Ji Tianqing knew that in the past 1,000 years, the 5 god emperors had searched the god world and the outer realms for the formation. The god of the underworld had even supported the Heaven Punisher tribe to search for the heaven-vanquishing formation in the lower realms. The 5 god emperors had found nothing. They had not found the heaven-vanquishing formation. He, the Kenshin who had died 1,000 years ago, had been reborn. It was only natural that the god of the underworld would suspect that he had the heaven-vanquishing formation. In just 2 short breaths, Ji Tianqing had sorted out his thoughts. He sneered in his heart. The god of the underworld is indeed scheming. He even covets the heaven-vanquishing formation. Not only did he support the Heaven Punisher tribe to search for the heaven-vanquishing formation in the lower realms, he even personally probed me when he met me. You're right. The heaven-vanquishing formation is indeed in my hands. I've also cultivated it for many years. Although the god of the underworld had inadvertently guessed the truth. How could Ji Tianqing admit to it? He looked at the god of the underworld with a shocked expression and roared in disbelief. The heaven-vanquishing formation? Didn't you take it away? The meaning of this reaction was clear. Back then you all joined forces to kill me in order to steal the heaven punishment formation. After my death, the heaven punishment formation must have been taken away by you all. How could you ask such a question? Don't tell me you didn't get the heaven punishment array? The god of the underworld was also startled. He suddenly realized that he had revealed a secret. He was quite upset and thought to himself, looking at Kenshin's reaction, the heaven punishment formation is not in his hands. Did he always think that we had the heaven punishment formation? As expected, Ji Tianqing's expression was complicated. He was in pain and excitement at the same time. He growled, "You 5 bastards, you have all surpassed the deity king realm and reached the god emperor realm. I thought it was because you obtained the eternal heavenly scripture and the heaven-vanquishing formation. From the looks of it, you only have the eternal heavenly scripture. Even if you kill me, you won't be able to get the heaven punishment array, ha ha ha." At the end of his speech, Ji Tianqing looked up to the sky and laughed heartily. It was obvious that he was gloating over their misfortune. The god of the underworld furrowed his brows. His expression and eyes became even more sinister. He thought that Kenshin did not have the heaven punishment formation, but he had always thought that the heaven punishment formation was in their hands. And now this secret had been exposed by his probing. He was even more upset and regretful. He began to worry. Since Kenshin knew that the heaven punishment formation was not in their hands, he would definitely go and look for it. If Kenshin was lucky enough to find the heaven punishment formation, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thinking of this, the god of the underworld quickly changed his words and tried to salvage the situation. "Kenshin, I was just bluffing you, but you believed me. Since we joined forces to kill you, how could we not get the heaven punishment formation? Without the heavenly scripture and the heaven punishment formation, how could the 5 of us have broken through to the god emperor realm?" Hearing this, Ji Tianqing's expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with anger. The god of the underworld secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He sneered and said, "How is it? You must be very angry and disappointed, right? Just when you saw the hope of revenge, it was destroyed. This feeling must be very painful and very hopeless, right?" Ji Tianqing's face was filled with anger. He cursed angrily, "You Ming. You despicable B****, what are you trying to do?" The god of the underworld laughed heartily. I wanted to mess with your mentality. I wanted to give you a glimmer of hope, and then I wanted to make you despair. You will never be able to win against me. B****, go to hell." Ji Tianqing was indeed enraged. He waved his heavenly hammer and used his ultimate technique to attack the god of the underworld. Seeing this, the god of the underworld was finally sure that Ji Tianqing had believed his words. The heavy burden in his heart was lifted. He hurriedly waved the sword of death and used his heavenly energy to block Ji Tianqing's attack. Boom, boom, boom. The 2 of them used their ultimate techniques and clashed fiercely in the sky, creating a deafening explosion. The sky within a radius of 10,000 miles was shattered by the violent power and was quickly filled with pitch-black void. The two of them fought with all their might and moved deeper into the grotto heaven. Before they knew it, another 2 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld moved another 100,000 miles and reached the deepest part of the grotto heaven. At this time, the tens of thousands of non-human tribe elites had already scattered and fled in all directions. They no longer dared to watch the battle or stay near the battlefield. They all fled in all directions. Half of the divine radiance grotto heaven had been destroyed by Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld. It was completely eroded by the void. A void storm swept through the remaining grotto heaven, making it extremely dangerous. The tens of thousands of non-human tribe elites had nowhere to hide. They could only escape toward the exit of the divine radiance grotto heaven. At this time, Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld only had 50% of their strength left. Both of them looked a little haggard. Ji Tianxing's hair was disheveled, and there were dozens of wounds all over his body. His white robe had long been dyed gold by the god's blood. He was exhausted and his face was pale. He looked like he was panting. While the two sides stopped fighting, he hurriedly took out a king-level divine pill and consumed it to quickly recover his divine power. The mask on the face of the god of the underworld's incarnation had also been shattered. It had fallen into some ruins. However, after the mask fell, his face could not be seen. This was because this incarnation of his had no face. The face under the mask was a ball of pitch-black death energy. The black robe he wore had also become tattered, and it fluttered in the wind. The aura of the sword of death in his hand had also weakened. The two sides stood in the shattered sky, facing each other from hundreds of miles away. Ji Tianxing was still full of killing intent and his eyes were resolute. However, the god of the underworld had already made up his mind to end this inconclusive battle. Kenshin, I have to admit that I have indeed underestimated you. If I had known that you would bring me such a surprise, I would not have only sent an incarnation. Today's battle ends here. When my true body arrives, you will definitely die. After saying these words, the god of the underworld passed through the spatial rift, entered the void and left the divine radiance grotto heaven. Obviously, he did not want to continue fighting, lest this incarnation of his be destroyed here. End of chapter. Chapter 40:13. To a divine king powerhouse, refining a clone or incarnation was absolutely not some easy matter. Not only did it require a portion of one's own effort and a wisp of one's soul, but it also required decades or centuries of time. The god of the underworld's main body had been busy researching the mystery of the gray fog and had no time to deal with government affairs. Most of the time he relied on his two avatars to deal with all sorts of matters. He had spent more than 100 years to create these two avatars. After all, the avatars could also use the power of the heavenly Tao. This was very heaven-defying and unbelievable. The two avatars of the god of the underworld had made many contributions over the past 1,000 years and had completed almost all of his missions. They were already inseparable from him. If this avatar continued to fight with Ji Tianxing, it would exhaust its energy in a few hours and be destroyed on the spot. That would be a huge loss to the god of the underworld and it would take decades to make up for it. But now, the five god emperors' plan to research the mystery of the gray fog was at the most critical moment. How could they waste time? Zhoush. With a flash of light, the god of the underworld entered the void and sped toward the depths of the starry sky. Ji Tianxing gave chase without hesitation and left the divine radiance grotto heaven. The god of the underworld had made the decisive choice to retreat in time to protect this avatar. But Ji Tianxing would not let this avatar escape. He was determined to destroy this avatar. Even though his current strength was not enough to threaten the god of the underworld's main body. But he was still very willing to destroy one of the god of the underworld's avatars and teach the god of the underworld a lesson. After the two of them left, the divine radiance grotto heaven regained its peace. The divine light that covered the sky gradually dissipated, and the deafening sound that reverberated between heaven and earth also slowly died down. In the distance, the tens of thousands of xenorace experts who had yet to recover from their shock and were fleeing in panic finally revealed expressions of relief as if they had just survived a calamity. They're finally gone. Yes. They're finally gone. We're safe. Is that mysterious black-robed man Lord Supreme? Why do I feel that something is wrong? Lord Supreme actually didn't kill that guy and even escaped into the void? That white-robed young man is a peak divine king. Didn't Lord Supreme surpass the divine king realm? Shouldn't he have easily killed the white-robed young man? This is too strange. Could it be that the domain leader lied to us? Actually, Lord Supreme is also a peak divine king? Yeah. This is the only explanation. Otherwise, how could Lord Supreme not be able to defeat that fellow? Do you think the two of them will return after escaping into the void? I don't know if they will come back. I just want to know who will win. I hope Lord Supreme Being can kill that white-robed young man. Even if he can't, he should at least severely injure him. Otherwise we'll be doomed. Yeah. If Lord Supreme is defeated and the white-robed young man returns, I'm afraid he'll kill us all. Then what are you waiting for? Take this opportunity to escape. The foreign race experts scattered in all directions were discussing the battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld. They expressed similar emotions and doubts. No one knew who would win or lose this battle. Of course, no one could enter the void to check the outcome. The god of the underworld sped through the void like a meteor streaking across the starry sky. His speed was extremely fast. In every breath he could cross tens of thousands of miles. If he was traveling normally, he would not waste his divine power so extravagantly. He would definitely take out his divine warship. That was a top-grade king-grade divine warship. Speed was unbelievably fast. A peak divine king would take 7 to 8 years to travel, but his divine warship would only take 3 months to arrive. After all, a top-grade king-grade divine warship could perform space jumps between stars and cross hundreds of millions of miles at a time. It was also because of this that he only took 3 months to leave the gray fog and arrive at the heavenly lion star. But now Ji Tianxing was tens of thousands of miles behind him, chasing relentlessly. If he took out his divine warship, he would probably be caught by Ji Tianxing as soon as he entered the divine warship. To be safe, he had to shake off Ji Tianxing first before using his divine warship to travel. Unfortunately, the god of the underworld's idea was good, but reality was not as he wished. Ji Tianxing flew through the void. He felt like a fish in water, like a dragon riding the wind. Ordinary peak divine kings could only fly in the void. They could fly 20 to 30,000 miles in every breath. When he flew in the void, he could travel 60 to 70,000 miles in every breath. Most importantly, he could break the rules of the heavenly Tao and teleport in the void. Only a top-grade king-grade divine warship that contained the power of the heavenly Tao could perform space jumps in the void. Other divine artifacts or godly king experts were unable to teleport. In order to chase after the god of the underworld, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate to expend his divine power and teleport continuously in the void. In a short while he actually caught up with the god of the underworld. Swoosh! In a flash, Ji Tianxing teleported in front of the god of the underworld and blocked his path. Damn it! The god of the underworld's expression changed immediately. His eyes shone with a cold light as he cursed in a low voice. He did not stop. Instead he sped up and rushed to the left. He did not want to waste time and wanted to speed around Ji Tianxing. Just now he did not use teleportation to conserve his divine power. Now in order to shake off Ji Tianxing he could not care less. Swish! In a flash, the god of the underworld teleported 20,000 miles and went around Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing reacted quickly. He seemed to have expected the god of the underworld to teleport away. He also teleported 20,000 miles and appeared behind him. This time, before the god of the underworld could teleport away again, Ji Tianxing took out the primordial chaos bell and suppressed it. The primordial chaos bell instantly expanded hundreds of millions of times and turned into a giant bell bigger than a mountain, covering a radius of 10,000 miles. The area within 10,000 miles was sealed. Even if the god of the underworld used the power of the heavenly path to teleport, it was neutralized by the power of the primordial chaos bell. He had failed to teleport and was trapped in the primordial chaos bell. If he wanted to escape the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, he had to break the bell wall. Netherworld, since you're here, stay. Ji Tianxing also appeared in the primordial chaos bell. He held the divine hammer in his hand and rushed toward the god of the underworld with murderous intent. This was what the god of the underworld said to him when he appeared. Now he returned this sentence to the god of the underworld. The god of the underworld was greatly provoked. It was as if he had been slapped by Ji Tianxing. He was ashamed and angry. Although he was wise and decisive, he was not someone who would submit to humiliation. He valued his reputation and dignity more than anyone else. Since Ji Tianxing was pestering him and was unwilling to give up, he also made up his mind to fight to the death with Ji Tianxing. Kenshin, I admit that you are stronger than before. You do have some ability. However, if you and I continue to fight, it will only be a waste of time. No one can defeat the other. Since you are so aggressive and pestering me, don't blame me for not being polite. Today I will destroy you even if I have to destroy this incarnation. Chapter 40:14. The god of the underworld decided to stop running and fight to the death with Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing could not have asked for more. He sneered at him. Don't speak so righteously as if you're not running anymore and want to fight to the death with me. In fact, you've already been trapped by my divine bell. There's no way you can escape. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing activated the primordial chaos bell with all his might, releasing a terrifying power to suppress the god of the underworld. Even though the god of the underworld could borrow the power of the heavenly Tao, it was offset by the divine bell's heavenly Tao power. Under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, he was not like an ordinary divine king, whose movements were slow and his strength was greatly weakened. However, his movements were indeed restricted. There was a great resistance and his combat strength was also weakened by about 20%. Seeing Ji Tianxing charging over with his divine hammer, the god of the underworld shouted angrily, "Arrogant and ignorant. I just don't want to damage this incarnation. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Exchanging your life with this incarnation is not a loss for me." As he shouted angrily, the god of the underworld waved the sword of death and launched a counterattack against Ji Tianxing. Both of them unleashed their full strength and used their ultimate killing moves, starting to fight again. Bam! Boom! 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 The battle that had just stopped for a short while erupted again. The difference was that the battle in the divine splendor grotto heaven would shatter heaven and earth, turning half of the grotto heaven into a void. But this time the battle was in the void under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell. No matter how intense the battle was, it would not affect others. At most it would only break the primordial chaos bell. Although the god of the underworld had the sword of death, he had the qualifications and possibility to do so. However, Ji Tianxing was not worried. He was confident that he could suppress the god of the underworld. Soon the two of them had exchanged 10 moves. A deafening sound reverberated within the god bell. After the collision of the divine arts, countless fragments of divine light scattered in all directions. The incomparably violent impact wrapped around the fragments of divine light and formed a destructive shockwave that spread out in all directions. However, the shockwave was blocked by the bell wall and could not spread out. The primordial chaos bell was under great pressure, constantly trembling and emitting bursts of buzzing sounds. Finally, the power of the god of the underworld began to decline rapidly. Ji Tianxing seized the opportunity and used his trump card. Sword of Destruction. He roared angrily as he absorbed a huge amount of world power. He held the sword with both hands and slashed out a giant golden sword that was thousands of feet long. The enormous sword was formed from the energy of the world, and it even carried over 300 types of divine Tao laws, causing its might to be unprecedentedly formidable. After all, the five elements world had grown several times stronger under Ji Tianxing's nurturing. As a result, Ji Tianxing's world destroyer sword was even more powerful than before. The god of the underworld's pupils constricted when he saw the golden greatsword slashing toward him. A hint of surprise flashed across his eyes. Damn it! It's the energy of the world again? It's actually comparable to the energy of the heavenly Tao. Previously he suspected that Ji Tianxing had the heaven-vanquishing formation and cultivated it, mastering the energy of the heavenly Tao. However, after probing he discovered that this was not the case. Then when he fought with Ji Tianxing used a brand new power. When he recognized that it was the energy of the world, he was very surprised and shocked that Ji Tianxing controlled a certain world. Now Ji Tianxing's world destroyer sword had some changes. The energy of the world was obviously stronger than before and was comparable to the energy of the heavenly Tao. Only then did the god of the underworld understand that Ji Tianxing had not used his full strength when fighting with him previously. At this moment Ji Tianxing was finally going all out. The world destroyer sword came too quickly, and the god of the underworld did not have time to think. He could only wave the sword of death and block with all his might. Kaboom! The god of the underworld slashed out a few pitch-black sword of death, which collided with the giant golden sword. There was an earth-shattering sound. The pitch-black sword of death collapsed, but the World Destroyer sword was still intact. It was just that its speed and power had decreased by half. Bang! The giant golden sword slashed the god of the underworld, tearing his black robe into pieces. His entire body flew backward and smashed into the bell wall thousands of miles away. Fortunately, this was only the incarnation of the god of the underworld, not a body of flesh and blood. Even though there was a huge wound on his chest, no divine blood flowed out. A pitch-black aura of death quickly covered his body and wounds, making him look even more sinister. However, the god of the underworld was severely injured, and his power weakened even further. He used his divine power to suppress his injuries. Holding the sword of death, he glared at Ji Tianqing and shouted coldly, "Kenshin, I didn't expect you to become so insidious and cunning. Previously, when you fought with me for so long, you pretended to use all your strength, but in fact you were still holding back. Only now did you reveal your true strength." In the god of the underworld's impression, Kenshin was cold, aloof, and arrogant. He was also quite confident and domineering and rarely played tricks. However, after reincarnating, Kenshin's temperament and style had obviously changed. This was not good news for the god of the underworld. He would rather Kenshin be the same as before. Only then would he have a chance to use some tricks and kill Kenshin again. If the god of swords became shrewd and scheming, he would also start to play tricks. Then it would be much more troublesome for him to kill Kenshin a second time. Hearing the god of the underworld's cold shout, Ji Tianqing approached with his hammer and sneered, "Humph, when it comes to being insidious and cunning, you 5 bastards are even more despicable. As for now, do you think I've used all my strength and brought out my true strength?" Hearing this, the god of the underworld was stunned for a moment and his gaze deepened. Before this, he was confident that his strength surpassed the God-King realm and could easily see through Ji Tianqing. But now he realized that he could not see through Ji Tianqing. After all, he could not be sure if the combat strength Ji Tianqing had just displayed was his full strength. Perhaps Ji Tianqing was still holding back? While the god of the underworld was thinking, Ji Tianqing once again swung his hammer and used his ultimate skill, launching a fierce attack on the god of the underworld. Sword breaking 9 heavens. The god of the underworld could only restrain his thoughts and focus on fighting with all his strength. Boom, boom, boom. The two of them fought fiercely in the void, their figures flashing back and forth, constantly erupting with dazzling divine light and earth-shattering explosions. After 10 moves, the god of the underworld had another wound on his body, and his strength weakened even further. After 20 moves, Ji Tianqing was also injured by the god of the underworld and his injuries worsened. Time quietly passed. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. After 8 hours, the two of them had exchanged tens of thousands of moves, and their divine powers were almost completely exhausted. At this point, the battle finally came to an end. Just as the god of the underworld and Ji Tianqing had predicted, the god of the underworld's avatar was slashed into pieces by Ji Tianqing after its strength was exhausted, and it dissipated into the void. Chapter 40:15. This result was very much in line with Ji Tianqing's expectations. But to the god of the underworld it was half the case. From the moment he was suppressed by the primordial chaos spell and decided to fight to the death with Ji Tianqing, he had expected that this incarnation would be destroyed. But he had thought that by sacrificing this incarnation he would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianqing. At the very least, he would be able to severely injure Ji Tianqing and make Ji Tianqing go into seclusion to recuperate for a few hundred years. But the result was beyond his expectations. His incarnation was indeed destroyed, and Ji Tianqing was neither dead nor severely injured. It was just that his divine power had been exhausted and he had entered a very weak state. He would need to recuperate for a month to recover. This result was unacceptable to the god of the underworld. Filled with regret and resentment, he dissipated into the void. Of course, although his incarnation was destroyed, his original body knew everything that had happened here. Ji Tianqing could not see into the depths of the void and did not know what the god of the underworld's original body was feeling at this moment. But he guessed that the god of the underworld must be ashamed and depressed, right? After all, the god of the underworld had lost more than just an incarnation. There was also a sword of death, a supreme-grade king-level divine worship, a huge amount of cultivation resources and 5 divine king powerhouses. That's right. After the god of the underworld's incarnation was destroyed, his sword of death, spatial ring and supreme-grade divine worship were scattered in the void. When Ji Tianxing was cleaning up the battlefield, he picked up these treasures and took them without hesitation. However, he was already panting from exhaustion and was extremely weak. His face was as pale as paper and he was sweating profusely. His divine power was also depleted. At this time he was not in the mood or energy to check the spoils of war. He supported his tottering body, put away the primordial chaos spell and took out the world in the sword. Then he entered the world in the sword and went to the Jutian Tenju Tower to recuperate. The burial of heaven's sword flew in the void and quickly left the heavenly lion star. After all, Ji Tianxing had achieved his goal of coming to the heavenly lion star zone. Next he would leave the heavenly lion star zone and head to the heavenly leader star zone to meet the sacred dragon emperor and Ji Wuhan. As for the heavenly lion star, Ji Tianxing had no need to return. Regardless of whether it was the dilapidated divine radiance grotto heaven or the tens of thousands of foreign race experts in the grotto heaven, he did not care about them at all. Anyway, he had already captured the heavenly lion region lord and suppressed him in the divine pagoda. After he finished recuperating and regained his divine power, he would interrogate the heavenly lion region master. Even the sword of death, the supreme grade divine worship, and the space ring of the god of the underworld would have to wait until he had recovered his strength. Shua. The sword of burial of heaven was like a jet black streak of light as it streaked through the air. It didn't attract anyone's attention. Ji Tianxing also returned to the distorted space-time and sat cross-legged under the Shui Yen sacred tree. He took out a large number of divine pellets and cultivation resources and started to recuperate in seclusion. Although he had exhausted his divine power this time, it would not damage his foundation of the divine path. However, every time he exhausted his divine power like this, it would cause serious damage to his divine body and divine core. Moreover, this was also an action that consumed a lot of potential. If it happened too many times, it would eventually damage his foundation. Of course, Ji Tianxing was aware of these dangers. However, he felt that it was worth it to be able to destroy an incarnation of the god of the underworld and create some trouble for the god of the underworld. At the same time, he had also verified his own strength through this battle. Reality proved that his prediction was correct. He had already surpassed ordinary peak divine kings and was second only to the god emperor. Just like the incarnation of the god of the underworld, his strength was between a peak divine king and a god emperor. Ji Tianxing could not help but speculate. Actually, I'm only at the 9th level of the divine king realm. I haven't become a peak divine king yet, but I can already defeat the incarnation of the god of the underworld. If I become a peak divine king, won't I be comparable to the god emperor who had just broken through? At that time, if I encounter the true body of the god of the underworld, even if I can't defeat him, I won't be in any danger, right? With this comparison, Ji Tianxing could clearly see the difference between his strength and that of the 5 god emperors. This could be said to be a crucial part of his revenge plan. The battle between Ji Tianxing and the god of the underworld had destroyed more than half of the divine radiance grotto heaven. Boundless void invaded the divine radiance grotto heaven, causing a terrifying void storm and turbulence. This caused the hole in the divine radiance grotto heaven to become bigger and bigger. Even if the heavenly Tao slowly repaired it, it could not make up for the huge gap. In the end, the divine radiance grotto heaven was swallowed by the void bit by bit and completely collapsed. From then on, the most sacred cultivation divine emperor of the heavenly lion planet no longer existed. Tens of thousands of foreign race experts had also fled outside before the divine radiance grotto heaven collapsed. They had survived, but they had no home to return to. They fell into chaos and grief. The heavenly lion region lord had been killed, and the divine radiance grotto heaven had been destroyed. They did not know where to go. As the news spread, the entire heavenly lion planet fell into panic and worry. No one knew what would happen next, but it would definitely be unrest and turmoil. As expected, a few days later, the news of the heavenly lion region lord's death spread throughout the major planets and was learned by countless star lords. Those star lords looked sad on the surface, but in fact they were secretly scheming. Many star lords began to accumulate strength, waiting for the opportunity to rise up. There were also some powerful heroes who took the opportunity to rope in other forces, wanting to dominate a region. Some of the more ambitious star lords, who had set their sights on the position of the domain lord, started stirring up trouble. In short, the position of the heavenly lion region lord was vacant, and many people coveted it. The heavenly lion region, which had been peaceful for hundreds of years, was also surging with undercurrents. It was about to enter a state of struggle for supremacy. In any case, many Star Lords understood one thing. Lord Supremacy only needed an obedient region lord to be his puppet and control the entire Heavenly Lion region. No matter which Star Lord it was, as long as they met Lord Supremacy's requirements, they would have a chance to become the region lord. It was obvious that the Heavenly Lion region would fall into chaos and war for many years to come. Unless Lord Supremacy personally appointed someone to be the region lord, the chaos would not be quelled until a hero unified the entire region. Many Star Lords had heard about the battle between Lord Supremacy and the white-robed young man, but he was the first to escape into the void. While the Star Lords were shocked and in disbelief, they also doubted Lord Supremacy's strength. Most of the Star Lords thought the same as the tens of thousands of Divine Lords. They all thought that the Heavenly Lion Region Lord had boasted too much in the past and praised Lord Supremacy to the heavens. In fact, Lord Supremacy was a peak Divine King. Moreover, Lord Supremacy could not defeat the white-robed young man from an alien race. Lord Supremacy, who used to be high and mighty, had lost his sacred halo and his majesty had plummeted. The reverence in the hearts of many Star Lords also decreased by half. Lord Supremacy could not even protect himself. Even if he was not killed by the white-robed young man, his fate would be miserable. In the next few decades, Lord Supremacy would not be able to intervene in the affairs of the Heavenly Lion region. In that case, if not now, when would they fight for the position of the region lord? Chapter 40:16. 10 days later. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was still speeding through the void and had yet to leave the Heavenly Lion sector. The Heavenly Lion sector was too vast. It would have to fly for at least 2 months before it could leave this sector. Even though the entire Heavenly Lion sector was surging with undercurrents and chaos and war were about to erupt. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven and Ji Tianxing knew nothing about it. 10 days had passed in the outside world. Ji Tianxing had already been in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for 500 days to recuperate. In the past year or so, not only had he healed his injuries and restored his strength to its peak state, but he had also checked his spoils of war. With the identity and status of the god of the underworld, he had countless god kings under his command. The wealth he had accumulated was immeasurable. Of course, 99% of the cultivation resources had been used up when he was exploring the mystery of the Grey Fog. Even if he had some rare treasures and supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts, he had left them all in the hands of his original body. Therefore, in the spatial ring worn by this incarnation of the god of the underworld, there were only tens of trillions worth of cultivation resources and a large number of supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts. Although those supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts were priceless and very precious treasures. However, the god of the underworld didn't care about them, and neither did Ji Tianxing. These various supreme-grade king-level divine artifacts were all used by the god of the underworld to win people's hearts. After checking the spatial ring, Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed and went to check the Sword of Death. This supreme-grade king-level divine artifact was different from other supreme-grade divine artifacts. It was neither an ancient artifact from the ancient era nor did it have any background or story. It was just an unsuccessful experiment when the god of the underworld tried to refine a top-grade divine artifact after he broke through to the god-emperor realm. After all, the god of the underworld wanted to refine an emperor-grade divine artifact. However, although this Sword of Death contained the power of the heavenly path, it was only supreme-grade king level and not emperor-grade. The only thing worth praising was that this sword was personally crafted by the god of the underworld and contained a terrifying aura of death. The Netherworld Divine Emperor's doppelganger wielded this sword with exceptional ease, and it also brought out the best in each other. After Ji Tianxing carefully inspected the divine sword, he also lost interest in it and kept it in his interspatial ring. He didn't plan on using the Sword of Death, but he fancied the quality of the Sword of Death. He thought that when he had time in the future he would reforge the Sword of Death. Or it could be used as a material to fuse with the Burial of Heaven sword and improve the quality of the Burial of Heaven sword. In the end, Ji Tianxing began to check the supreme-grade king-class divine ship left behind by the god of the underworld. To be honest, it had been many years since Ji Tianxing had steered the divine battleship around. He used to own a divine ship as well, but that was a low-end heavenly god-tier ship. He had long since refined it into a material. Now that he had obtained a supreme-grade king-class divine weapon, it would be much more convenient for him to travel in the future. He didn't need to expend his god power, and he didn't need to make the burial of heaven fly all the way. In terms of speed, the Supreme Grade King-class divine ship was definitely several times faster than the burial of heaven sword. The doppelganger of the god of the underworld was dead, and the memories of his soul in the divine battleship had also dissipated. The divine battleship now had no owner, and Ji Tianqing could refine it as he pleased. Ji Tianqing spent 4 months in the distorted spacetime before he successfully refined the Supreme Grade King-class divine ship of the god of the underworld. One could imagine the fates of the god kings who were hiding in the divine battleship to heal themselves. When Ji Tianqing fought the god of the underworld, the 5 god kings were severely injured and had no choice but to escape into the divine battleship. The 2 god kings who only had their godhoods left started to heal themselves as soon as they entered the divine battleship. The other 2 god kings who were severely injured and Yanjiu, who was at the peak of the god king realm, had the same reaction. They had blind faith in the god of the underworld and believed that the god of the underworld would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianqing. Therefore they stayed in the divine battleship to heal themselves and didn't pay attention to what was happening outside. It wasn't until a long time later that Yanjiu realized that something was wrong. He thought that since a few days had passed, his master should have killed Kenshin and left on the divine battleship. However, his master didn't move and he didn't ask him to take control of the divine battleship. Therefore Yanjiu stopped healing himself and wanted to find out what was going on. At this time, Ji Tianqing noticed that he was about to leave the divine battleship, and he severely injured Yanjiu with lightning speed. Yanjiu was caught off guard and was hit by Ji Tianqing on the spot. Blood spurted out of his orifices and his body collapsed. Only then did he realize that since Kenshin was in control of the divine battleship, something bad must have happened to his master. However, he didn't have the chance to fight back and he couldn't escape from the divine battleship. Ji Tianqing continuously attacked him with his soul and severely injured his godhead, causing him to fall into a coma. After Yanjiu fell into a coma, Ji Tianqing crushed his godhead and killed him completely. After a long time, Ji Tianqing successfully refined the top-grade divine battleship. He couldn't help but smile when he saw that the 4 ninth-stage divine kings were still peacefully healing themselves in the divine battleship. How much confidence do you have? How much faith do you have in the god of the underworld? Forget it, I'll let you die in a daze. Ji Tianqing muttered a few words in a low voice and released a formless soul energy, attacking the 4 divine kings fiercely. The 4 divine kings weren't prepared at all and couldn't resist in time. They were knocked unconscious by him. Ji Tianqing did the same thing to the 4 deity kings, erasing their divine souls and crushing their godheads into dust. Just like that, the 5 divine kings followed in the footsteps of the god of the underworld's incarnation. Ji Tianqing dealt with the spoils of war and took the 5 divine kings' godhead fragments and began to refine them. 2 foreign race god kings and 2 ninth-stage god race god kings were the first to be refined by him. 2 months later, Ji Tianqing refined the godhead fragments of the 4 divine kings. His strength increased slightly, but he also absorbed 10 divine Dao laws. Then he refined Yanjiu's godhead fragments. Unlike the previous 4 divine kings, Ji Tianqing not only had to absorb Yanjiu's power and divine Dao laws, he also had to refine his memories. This was because Ji Tianqing had heard Yanjiu address the god of the underworld as his master. Since Yanjiu was a peak divine king and a disciple of the god of the underworld, he must be a trusted aide of the god of the underworld. He must know a lot of secrets and inside information. Until now, Ji Tianqing had already fought with the god of the underworld's incarnation. But he still didn't know much about the god of the underworld's situation and plans. Yanjiu's godhead fragments might bring him a surprise. A month later, Yanjiu's godhead fragments were completely refined by Ji Tianqing. He gained a lot. Not only did his strength increase, but he also obtained 15 divine Dao laws. Now Ji Tianqing had mastered a total of 1,085 divine Dao laws. Other than that, Yanjiu's memories had also given him a lot of benefits. Yanjiu had been following the god of the underworld around the gray fog. He was in charge of commanding and dispatching people. Even though the god of the underworld didn't tell Yanjiu the core secret. Yanjiu didn't know what the gray fog was or why the 5 god emperors were so painstakingly researching it. But Yanjiu understood the situation around the gray fog. He also knew the forces under the god of the underworld and the people he could mobilize. Some of his guesses about the gray fog were his own and had yet to be confirmed. Chapter 40:17. Although Ji Tianqing had refined Yan Jiu's memories, he still could not figure out the final secret. However, he had obtained a lot of important information and had a deep understanding of the god of the underworld's power. This was great news for him. He had taken a big step forward in his revenge. Of course, the foundation of the Netherworld Divine Emperor's forces and the number of people he could mobilize were still beyond his expectations, causing him to be rather surprised. From Yan Jiu's memories, he knew that the god of the underworld not only controlled the reincarnation island in the god world, but also the Heavenly Lion Galaxy. Currently, under the god of the underworld's orders, there were more than 10,000 Sir Gods and more than 200 King Gods stationed near the Grey Fog. These people were all elites. The Sir Gods were all upper celestials above the 7th heaven realm. The 200 King Gods were all middle celestial kings and a few upper celestial kings. Among them, there were 4 peak celestial kings and 3 of them were disciples of the god of the underworld. In addition, the god of the underworld could mobilize more than 50,000 Sir Gods. He could mobilize and gather more than 1,000 King Gods. Of course, if there were no special circumstances, the god of the underworld would not go through so much trouble to mobilize so many elite soldiers. Ji Tianqing could not help but feel a headache when he understood this information. He could not help but think, the god of the underworld alone has so many elite soldiers under his command. If I were to take revenge on the 5 god emperors, wouldn't there be more than 200,000 Sir Gods and a few thousand King Gods? Even the god emperor would not be able to withstand such a terrifying force. Even if I were to secretly rush to the Grey Fog and ambush them. If I were to deal with the god of the underworld alone, I would have to face a god emperor, 200 King Gods and 10,000 Sir Gods. It seems that my revenge plan needs to be carefully considered. I cannot act rashly. After refining the godhead, Ji Tianqing thought of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord who was still suppressed in the Divine Pagoda. Therefore he went to the 3rd level of the Divine Pagoda to interrogate the Sky Lion Region Lord. Shua. When he entered this cold and dark space, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was still suppressed in the wasteland. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord was already seriously injured, and he had been suppressed by a powerful divine formation for so long. When Ji Tianqing saw him, his injuries had worsened and his aura was even weaker. Even his consciousness was in a semi-conscious and semi-conscious state. Hence, Ji Tianqing waved his hand, sending a wisp of soul force into the Heavenly Lion Domain Lord's godhead. Under the stimulation of the power of the divine soul, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord suddenly sobered up, and his spirit recovered a little. He lay on his stomach on the wasteland in ragged clothes, trying his best to raise his head to look at Ji Tianqing. His eyes were filled with incomparable hatred. Bastard! You will die a horrible death. Lord Supreme Martial Artist will be back soon and he will definitely tear you into pieces. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord's voice was hoarse as he roared hysterically. Ji Tianqing could not help but frown, revealing a trace of pity in his eyes. He said calmly, I didn't expect that you would still have such high hopes for the god of the underworld when you are already in prison. Unfortunately, there is something very cruel that I still have to tell you. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord frowned fiercely, narrowed his eyes and growled, What? Ji Tianqing spread his hands and said truthfully, Not long after I captured you, the god of the underworld broke into the divine brilliance grotto heaven with 5 divine kings. You were only 100 breaths away from seeing your savior. Of course, it was not the god of the underworld who came but one of his incarnations. So, even if you saw him, he would not be able to save you. That's because I've fought with them for half a day and I've killed 5 god kings. The divine brilliance grotto heaven was also shattered by us. Now it has been swallowed by the void and no longer exists. The incarnation of the god of the underworld was also heavily injured by me. Seeing that the divine brilliance grotto heaven was shattered, he escaped into the void and wanted to escape. Unfortunately, I chased after him and fought with him in the void for a few hours, destroying his incarnation. Ji Tianqing used simple words to describe what had happened. After the Heavenly Lion Region Lord heard this, he was stunned. He was stunned for a few seconds before he came back to his senses. He struggled violently and roared with a ferocious face. No. This is impossible. Who do you think you are? You are just a peak divine king. How can you defeat Lord Supreme Martial Artist? Lord Supreme Martial Artist is the supreme unparalleled god of the underworld. Even if it is just his incarnation, he can easily crush you. I don't believe it. Obviously, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord could not accept this result and refused to believe it. Ji Tianqing did not explain. Instead, he took out a token, a sword of death, and a few tokens and presented them in front of the Heavenly Lion Region Lord. Other than the sword of death, the other things were found in the space ring of the god of the underworld. When the Heavenly Lion Region Lord saw these things and felt the familiar aura of Lord Supreme Martial Artist, he was stunned again. As if he had been petrified, his eyes widened as he stared at the token and the tokens. His entire body could not help but tremble. A few seconds later he collapsed to the ground like a deflated balloon. His eyes, which originally had some spirit, became obscure and dim. It was obvious that his heart was dead and he was completely desperate. Facts spoke louder than words. The result that he could not believe had become the truth. A moment later he slowly closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths, trying to calm his emotions. When he calmed down, he asked Ji Tianqing in a slightly trembling voice, "Your strength and means are indeed beyond my expectations. You clearly have the strength to kill me easily, but you didn't kill me and let me live until now. Tell me, what do you want, or what do you want me to do to spare my life?" After all, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord was old and shrewd. In the face of ironclad facts, he quickly made a decision. He gave up all his beliefs, persistence and dignity and calmly sought a way to survive. Ji Tianqing said calmly, 8,000 years ago, there was a heavenly dragon emperor from the dragon realm who mysteriously fell in the starry sky. He briefly described the identity, strength and appearance of the heavenly dragon emperor. After that, he stared at the Heavenly Lion Region Lord and asked, "Have you ever seen him? Have you heard of his deeds? Or, did anything major or strange happen in the Heavenly Lion region 1,000 years ago?" Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, the Heavenly Lion Region Lord understood what he meant and asked, "Are you inquiring about the whereabouts and clues of this heavenly dragon emperor?" Ji Tianqing did not answer but quietly waited for an answer. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord said calmly, "I can't remember what happened 1,000 years ago. Moreover, you have to investigate some unusual clues and deeds. I can't answer you rashly. I have to carefully recall, analyze and consider carefully before I can give you an answer." Chapter 40:18. To be honest, Ji Tianqing agreed with the Region Master's serious attitude. But he felt that the Region Master seemed to be stalling for time. After all, this guy was best at stalling for time. So Ji Tianqing said coldly, "I can give you time to think and recall, but only 2 days." Hearing the 2-day deadline, the Region Master suddenly became anxious and asked anxiously, "How can 2 days be enough? I need more than 2 days to comb through my memory. No, it will take at least half a year. This kind of thing must be cautious." Ji Tianqing was not angry and said in an unquestionable tone, 3 days at most, no discussion." Seeing his attitude so firm, the Region Master was at his wits' end and trembled with anger. But he was a fish on the chopping block and had no choice but to accept his fate. Then both of them fell into silence. Ji Tianqing stood in the sky above the wilderness, closed his eyes and waited silently. The Region Master did not dare to delay. He quickly closed his eyes and calmly combed through his memory, looking for relevant clues. He knew that this matter was related to whether he could survive or not. So he would never make up lies and joke about his life. Time passed quietly. The wilderness was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Soon a day passed. Both of them remained in their original positions and did not move. 2 days passed and Ji Tianqing still did not move. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord racked his brains and even turned over a few times. Finally, 3 days passed and the deadline was up. Ji Tianqing opened his eyes and stared at the Region Master, waiting for his answer. The Heavenly Lion Region Master was full of frustration. He frowned and said in a gloomy tone, "I've searched through my divine soul memories, but I've never seen or heard of that dragon emperor Feng Tian. 1,000 years ago, several major events happened in the Region Master, but they had nothing to do with him." Ji Tianqing, who had a glimmer of hope, was suddenly disappointed. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and shot out a divine light to kill the Region Master. The Heavenly Lion Region Lord was shocked and shouted, "You didn't keep your word." Ji Tianqing said coldly, "I did not promise to spare your life and you did not help me. How can you not die?" After saying that, the sword in his hand slashed down. Bang! The Region Master's head was chopped and his godhead was shattered. He died on the spot. Ji Tianqing shot out another divine fire and burned his body to ashes. Only a dozen godhead fragments were taken away by him. After dealing with the region master, Ji Tianxing left the Jutian Tenju Tower. He appeared in the void and let the burial of heaven sword stop. Buried heaven, it's slow and exhausting for you to travel like this. It just so happens that I've obtained the Netherworld Divine Emperor's divine ship. I'll use this divine ship to travel. Ji Tianxing explained to buried heaven and summoned a supreme-grade king-level god ship. Swish. With a flash of light, a long and narrow divine warship that was as black as ink with a gloomy and cold aura appeared in the void. Ji Tianxing put away the burial of heaven sword and personally drove the divine ship through the void. The speed of this divine warship was indeed fast. It was like a ghost as it silently streaked across the sky. Compared to the burial of heaven sword, it was about 5 times faster. The original plan was to enter the heavenly stalwart star zone in 3 months. Now it seemed that half a month would be enough. A huge abandoned star appeared in the void in front of him. There were a few minerals and metals on the desolate and barren star. Ji Tianxing drove the divine ship and landed on the abandoned star. The burial of heaven was puzzled and asked, "Even if you want to devour a star, you should not have chosen this abandoned star, right?" Ji Tianxing smiled and explained, "This abandoned star is so barren. Why would I waste my time here? I just want to try the space jump of the god of the underworld's divine ship." The burial of heaven was enlightened. He was excited and expectant. Space jump? Isn't that super long-distance teleportation? You can think of it that way. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "However, space jump is to jump from one star to another. The distance it covers is not hundreds of thousands or millions of miles. It is calculated in billions of miles." Then he activated the array of the supreme-grade divine ship and started the space jump. Swish. The light and shadows around the pitch-black divine warship were distorted, and ripples appeared in the void. In the blink of an eye, the black divine ship disappeared. The next moment, the divine ship crossed a distance of more than 200 million miles and appeared on another star in front of him. The effect of this super long-distance teleportation was very exaggerated and Ji Tianxing was very satisfied. However, when he saw that the cultivation resources stored in the divine ship had decreased by 30%, he became a bit depressed. Damn it! Just one space jump had consumed 2 trillion worth of resources? This means that the cultivation resources in the spatial ring of the god of the underworld are only enough for me to perform a few space jumps? He suddenly understood. No wonder the spatial ring worn by the god of the underworld's incarnation only had a few trillion worth of resources despite his noble status. It turned out that the god of the underworld had used a lot of space jumps when he was on his way. He had used up all his cultivation resources. Forget it. I'm now a super millionaire worth a few trillion. Why would I care about 2 trillion worth of resources? Let's try again and see if this divine ship can perform continuous space jumps. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing activated the array of the divine ship again and was about to perform a space jump. However, there was no reaction from the complicated array. The space jump that he expected did not happen either. It still doesn't work. Even a supreme-grade divine ship can't perform continuous space jumps. Ji Tianxing figured out the answer and was confident. Even if a supreme-grade divine ship performed a space jump once, it would need some time before it could perform a second space jump. This must be the cooldown time of the array and technique that the White Dragon had mentioned. Ji Tianxing circled the abandoned planet beneath his feet and flew for an hour. Just as he was about to leave this abandoned planet, he performed another space jump. Swoosh. There was another flash of light. The pitch-black divine ship, which was thousands of feet long, disappeared in a distorted illusion. The next moment, the divine ship crossed more than 400 million miles of void space and appeared on another abandoned planet in the distance. This time the cultivation resources stored in the divine ship had decreased by 5 trillion. Through this, Ji Tianxing came to a conclusion. When a divine ship performed a space jump, the amount of resources consumed was directly proportional to the distance of the space jump. Ji Tianxing carefully observed the divine ship's interior and the divine arrays that supported the space jump. He discovered that the divine arrays were indeed in a dormant state and were slowly recovering. Based on the speed of recovery, he would have to wait a day before he could perform a third space jump. This situation gave him a deeper understanding of the divine warship. Chapter 40:19. Every time it did a space jump, not only did it expend a huge amount of cultivation resources, but the divine worship itself was also under great pressure and needed time to recover. And the cooling down time would become even longer after repeated space jumps. Looks like I have to use the space jump function of this divine worship for emergencies and escape. I should try my best not to use it for traveling. After understanding the situation of the divine worship, Ji Tianxing did not use space jumps anymore. Instead, he steered the divine worship through the void. After thinking for a while, he decided to give this divine worship a new name. It would be called the God-slaying battleship. In the future, he would use this divine worship to deal with the 5 god emperors. The god of the underworld's expression would be very interesting when he saw this divine worship again. Ji Tianxing personally steered the supreme grade divine worship, which was many times faster than the sword of burial of heaven. But there was one flaw that was very regrettable. That was, he had to personally steer the divine worship. He could not be distracted and he could not cultivate in seclusion during the journey, unless he could teach a few close and trusted people to steer the divine worship for him. But this required time and he decided to consider it in the future. After all, this was a supreme-grade king-level divine worship. The arrays inside were all supreme-grade king-level and were very profound and complicated. Only a high-level god king could control these arrays. As for the high god king by his side at present, there was only Bai Feng. The journey was always so dry and boring. Luckily it was not long. Half a month passed very quickly. On the 16th day, Ji Tianxing steered the god-slaying battleship into the Heavenly Leader's star zone. This trip to the Heavenly Stalwart's starfield was different from the previous starfields, where they had to be on guard. The entire Heavenly Leader's star zone was under the rule of the Sacred Dragon Emperor. With the Sacred Dragon Emperor's actual body holding the fort, the entire star zone was very peaceful. In addition, Ji Tianxing had contacted the Sacred Dragon Emperor twice in the past few years. So far, nothing major had happened in the Heavenly Leader's star zone, and no forces from other star zones had invaded. Therefore, Ji Tianxing entering the Heavenly Leader's star zone was no different from entering his own territory. He did not need to land on a certain star to find out the situation in the Heavenly Leader's star zone, nor did he need to find out which star the Sacred Dragon Emperor was on. He already knew enough about the Heavenly Leader's star zone through the Sacred Dragon Emperor. The Sacred Dragon Emperor resided on the Heavenly Leader star. It was a famous heavenly star located in the center of the Heavenly Leader star domain. Of the Heavenly Leaders. Through the numerous stars. Although many of the densely packed waste stars in the surroundings contained large amounts of minerals and metals, they were still very rare. However, Ji Tianxing had no intention of stopping to refine the star. Right now, his most pressing thought was to reach the Heavenly Leader star as soon as possible and see Ji Wuhan, who had been separated from him for more than 20 years. At that time, the Emperor had used an image recording crystal to show him Ji Wuhan's appearance, life and growth. However, he was still a little worried since he couldn't see Ji Wuhan with his own eyes. Of course, this was not because he was suspicious or wary of the Sacred Dragon Emperor. He just wanted to see Ji Wuhan. He hoped that the family could be reunited soon. After all, Yunyao, Ji Wushuang and Jiku had been missing and worrying about Ji Wuhan all these years. Everyone's worries would dissipate when the family was reunited. Another 6 days passed in a flash. Ji Tianxing finally arrived at the Heavenly Leader's star, thanks to the Heavenly Leader's star. Just as he expected, the Heavenly Leader's star zone was peaceful. He flew through half the star zone and did not encounter any danger. Looking from the void, the Heavenly Leader's star, which was more than 2 billion miles in diameter, was also peaceful. The surface of the Heavenly Leader's star was also protected by a layer of golden space barrier. Ji Tianxing steered the divine ship through the golden spatial barrier and entered the Tiankue star. He did not inform the Sacred Dragon Emperor and Ji Wuhan in advance to give them a surprise. The Heavenly Leader's star was very big. The heaven and earth contained abundant divine power. The mountains and rivers were beautiful and the scenery was pleasant. There were 7 continents on this star. More than 50 billion alien species lived on it and there were more than 100 races. Before the Sacred Dragon Emperor ruled the Heavenly Leader's star zone, the Heavenly Leader's star was the primary target of many overlords. This place was once ruled by various major powers. The flames of war were incessant throughout the year, and the alien species people lived in an abyss of suffering. But after the Sacred Dragon Emperor ruled the Heavenly Leader's star zone, he personally took charge of the Heavenly Leader's star. The overlords and powerful forces that ruled the 7 continents were all subdued by him. Those who did not submit were directly eliminated. Now the 7 continents were peaceful. There were only small conflicts between the major races and forces. There were definitely no major wars or hatred. As a result, the heavenly leader's star developed in peace and became prosperous again. According to the sacred dragon emperor, many cultivation geniuses had appeared on the heavenly leader's star in the past 200 years. There were even a few godly king experts. Ji Tianxing was naturally gratified that Ji Wuhan was able to live in such a peaceful environment while living here. Swoosh! The deity-slaying battleship flew across the sky and crossed 2 continents in one day. The next morning, the deity-slaying battleship arrived at the central part of the star zone and stopped above a sea of clouds. This sea of clouds spanned hundreds of thousands of miles. Below it was a huge lake. Of course, this lake was more like an inland sea. The lake was huge and deep. It was as bottomless as a black pool, but it contained abundant spirit energy and resources. In the sea of clouds above the lake was a cloud platform. It was the entrance to the Cloud Sea mystic realm. This cloud platform spanned hundreds of thousands of feet. There were 200 godly monarchs and 3 godly kings stationed on it. The Cloud Sea mystic realm was the sacred cultivation ground of the heavenly leader's star. It was also the abode of the Star Zone Master and the sacred dragon emperor. The 3 godly king realm guard commanders led 200 elite guards to guard the entrance of the mystic realm all year round. When the deity-slaying battleship landed on the cloud platform, the guards were very alert. They hurriedly took out their Kenshin weapons and surrounded the battleship. The 3 leaders of the guards held their divine weapons and were on high alert. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing kept the deity-slaying battleship and appeared on the cloud platform alone. In order to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and trouble, he looked calmly at the 3 guard commanders and said, "Godly King Tianxing is here to visit the sacred dragon emperor. I would like the 3 of you to report the truth and pass on the message." Seeing that he was empty-handed and had no enmity, and had taken the initiative to report his identity and purpose of visit, the guard's enmity was greatly reduced. The 3 guard commanders looked at each other in surprise. Under normal circumstances, godly kings occasionally came here to seek an audience with the Sky Leader Region Master. Very few people knew that the Sky Leader Region Master's backer was the Sacred Dragon Emperor from the Dragon Realm. Since this person directly mentioned the Sacred Dragon Emperor's honorific title, he most likely came from the Dragon Realm and knew the Sacred Dragon Emperor. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 40-20. After understanding the crux of the matter, the 3 guard commanders finally let down their guard and retracted their hostility. Divine King Tianxing, please wait for a moment. We will ask the Domain Lord for instructions. One of the commanders bowed to Ji Tianxing and explained. The other commander took out his communication jade slip and reported the situation to the Domain Lord. After all, they would report everything to the Domain Lord and would not cross the line to disturb the Sacred Dragon Emperor. Unless it was a special situation or an extremely urgent battle situation, they would not dare to directly contact the Sacred Dragon Emperor. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood. He stood on the cloud platform and waited patiently. Although Ji Tianxing did not know what the Tiankui Region Lord and the Sacred Dragon Emperor were doing at this moment. But he could guess that after the Domain Lord received the news, he would definitely quickly meet the Sacred Dragon Emperor to report the situation. Because in just a short 15 minutes, the guard commander received an order from the Domain Lord. A communication jade slip flew out from the Cloud Sea mystic realm and landed in the guard commander's hand. After reading it, the guard commander waved his hand and gestured for all the guards to keep their weapons and disperse to the surroundings. Then he bowed to Ji Tianxing and said respectfully, "Divine King Tianxing, the Domain Lord invites you to enter the mystic realm." With that, he and the other 2 guard commanders worked together to open the entrance to the mystic realm. Whoosh! There was a flash of divine light and a blinding white light door appeared in the middle of the cloud platform. It was at least 30 feet tall. The guard commander who had received the order personally led Ji Tianxing through the light door and into the Cloud Sea mystic realm. The mystic realm was not very big and only had a radius of 200,000 miles. But it was beautiful and full of spirit energy. The guard commander led the way in front and led Ji Tianxing to fly over mountains and rivers into the depths of the mystic realm. It was probably because he guessed that Ji Tianxing's identity was very honorable from the Domain Lord's tone. The guard commander's attitude was especially respectful. He didn't know Ji Tianqing's temperament, so he didn't dare to speak, lest he offend Ji Tianqing. Only when Ji Tianqing asked him some questions did he dare to open his mouth and answer truthfully. However, he was also very careful and did not dare to say too much. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing knew that the Tiankui region lord and the sacred dragon emperor had high prestige and were very strict with their subordinates. Of course, this was a good thing. It showed that the sacred dragon emperor had great control over the heavenly lead star domain. Half an hour later, the guard commander landed with Ji Tianqing in the middle of a cluster of palaces. The palaces were located at the peak of the mountains. They were shrouded in clouds and mist, giving the place a mystical appearance. More than 20,000 experts lived in these palaces. 90% of them were outsiders from the heavenly stalwart star area. The divine palace in front of Ji Tianqing was the core of many palaces, the most solemn and mysterious hidden dragon divine palace. Obviously, this was the emperor's residence. There were many guards standing guard around the divine palace. There were also dozens of secret sentries hidden in various parts of the divine palace. Besides Ji Tianqing, almost no one else came near this place. After all, the emperor had always lived in seclusion and did not usually deal with government affairs. His status was very high. On the surface, the Tiankui region lord held the most power and handled all the affairs. The Tiankui region lord lived on another mountain peak. In comparison, his divine palace was more lively. Many generals came and went every day. Divine King Tianqing, this is the sacred dragon emperor's divine palace. I do not have the right to enter, so the guards will bring you to the sacred dragon emperor. I will take my leave now. The guard commander bowed to Ji Tianqing. After a few words of explanation, he took his leave. The leader of the guards guarding the hidden dragon divine palace personally led Ji Tianqing into the divine palace. They walked towards the study in the depths of the divine palace. Before Ji Tianqing saw the sacred dragon emperor, his divine senses had already detected the aura of a peak divine king in the study in the depths of the divine palace. Obviously, the sacred dragon emperor was already waiting in the study. As expected, the leader of the guards led Ji Tianqing to the entrance of the study. Before the leader of the guards could announce their arrival, the study door opened and a loud voice sounded from inside. After so many years, Long Tian, you are finally here. Following the hearty laughter, the kind-looking sacred dragon emperor, dressed in a golden robe with white hair and beard, stepped out of the study to welcome Ji Tianqing at the door. Seeing the sacred dragon emperor appear, the leader of the guards hurriedly retreated to one side and bowed. Ji Tianqing also cupped his fists and bowed. He smiled and said, "Senior sacred dragon, after more than 1,000 years, we finally meet again." The sacred dragon emperor nodded slightly and hurriedly excused himself. He reached out to help him up. The two entered the study side by side. When they sat down, they exchanged pleasantries. After both of them were seated, guards immediately served the divine tea and spirit fruits. They bowed and left the study, closing the door behind them. Only Ji Tianqing and the sacred dragon emperor were left in the study. After it quietened down, the two of them started to talk. After not seeing you for more than 1,000 years, I did not expect that not only did your face change slightly, but you also look younger. The sacred dragon emperor sized up Ji Tianqing and said with a sigh. Previously, the two of them had used the divine weapon to talk, but the sacred dragon emperor did not see Ji Tianqing's face clearly. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, he realized that Ji Tianqing had changed. "Sai, I really don't know what you experienced in the divine world all those years." Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "It was all thanks to the 5 great god emperors. I almost lost my life but luckily survived. Forget it, it's all in the past. Let's not talk about it today." Alright, let's not talk about it. The sacred dragon emperor also guessed that there was a twist in the story. Seeing that Ji Tianqing was unwilling to talk about sad matters, he changed the topic. "Why didn't you inform me in advance that you were coming this time? Otherwise, I could have made preparations in advance." Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, "I was just passing by the heavenly leader's star region and wanted to visit you and Wuhan. It's not a grand matter, why did I have to inform you in advance?" At the mention of Ji Wuhan, the sacred dragon emperor stroked his beard and said, "Although you came suddenly without informing me, your luck is very good. But your luck is really good. Wuhan is currently out on a mission and will be back to report in a few days. At most you will be able to see him in 4 days' time. Ji Tianqing also heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. Is Wuhan heading to other stars to carry out a mission? In that case I am really lucky. The Sacred Dragon Emperor nodded and said, ever since Wuhan broke through to the Divine Lord realm and went into seclusion to cultivate, the speed of his improvement has slowed down. Moreover, his foundation of the Divine Tao have been very solid. Compared to cultivating in seclusion, actual combat is more beneficial to his improvement. Therefore, I often send him out to carry out missions as a form of training for him. Fortunately, the results are quite good. After many years of training, his strength has increased greatly. Now he has already become a high-level Divine Lord. Hearing this good news, Ji Tianqing also felt happy and proud for Wuhan. He suddenly thought of someone and asked, that's right, where is your adopted daughter, Qi Linger? The Sacred Dragon Emperor glanced at him and gave a knowing smile. He said, all these years Linger and Wuhan have grown up together and have a deep relationship. They can be said to be inseparable. When Wuhan went to other stars to carry out missions, Linger naturally followed him. Chapter 40-21. From the Emperor's expression and tone, it was obvious that he had misunderstood something. Ji Tianqing had only asked about Qi Linger because he wanted to see what the Kirin bloodline was like. He knew that Qi Linger and Wuhan were fellow disciples and had a good relationship. Hence he wanted to see what Qi Linger's character was like. Unexpectedly, the emperor thought that he could not wait to see his future daughter-in-law. Of course, Ji Tianqing Yunyao and Ji Ku had the same thought when they found out about Qi Linger and Wuhan's close relationship. Even though the emperor had misunderstood, Ji Tianqing had just laughed it off and did not explain anything. The two of them chatted for a while about Ji Wuhan and Qi Linger. The emperor told Ji Tianqing about all the interesting things that had happened between Ji Wuhan and Qi Linger over the years. When he told those stories, big or small, his face became especially kind and the smile on his face was very gentle and gratified. Ji Tianqing could tell that the emperor truly liked the two children. Moreover, the two childhood sweethearts had a strong relationship and were showing signs of becoming Tao companions. The emperor was also very comforted and did not dislike them, much less try to ruin their relationship. After all, Qi Linger was the emperor's adopted daughter and Ji Wuhan was his favorite disciple. He treated these two children as if they were his own. Understanding this point, Ji Tianqing tried to ask, Senior Xinglong, from what you said, it can be seen that Wuhan and Linger love each other, have deep feelings and trust each other very much. I don't know what you think about this. Have you mentioned it to the two children? The emperor smiled and said, what can I think about it? As long as the two children grow up safely and happily, I am very satisfied. As for their relationship, to be honest, they are still very young. Compared to the 100,000 years of life limit, they are still very young. Of course, I will not interfere or demand anything from them at such a young age. I will let nature take its course. I will pretend that I know nothing and let them do whatever they want. Hearing this answer, Ji Tianqing was relieved. He nodded slightly and said, that's right. The matters of the heart were very complicated. It was definitely not as simple as it seemed on the surface, and it was also not something that could be clearly explained in a few words. As elders, we naturally can't forcefully interfere. Whether it was forced matchmaking or opposition and sabotage, it would put pressure on the children. The best thing to do was to wait and see and let nature take its course. Only when it's necessary will we lend them a helping hand and solve their problems. That's right, that's right. The Sacred Dragon Emperor nodded in agreement with Ji Tianqing. After talking about Ji Tianqing and Qi Linger, the Sacred Dragon Emperor started to talk about serious matters. He asked Ji Tianqing with a face full of concern, you have been traversing the void space for the past few years. You have been passing through several galaxies, searching for news and clues about your master? Did you encounter any danger during this period? Did you find anything? Ji Tianqing didn't want to hide anything from him, so he told him about his experiences in the past few years. The Sacred Dragon Emperor's heart also hung in the air as he listened to him talk about the battle with the God Emperor's clone and how he had been surrounded by numerous foreign tribe divine kings. Finally, the Sacred Dragon Emperor was relieved to hear that he had overcome all obstacles and even destroyed the God Emperor's clone. He smiled with relief. In addition, the Sacred Dragon Emperor only knew the general situation of those few galaxies after listening to Ji Tianqing's narration. Since you have taken control of the Blue Scorpion Divine King and made him the master of the Scorpion region, he can only obey your orders. The Scorpion region is now under your control. Now the masters of the 9 galaxies have all been reduced to puppets, and they all have powerful experts backing them. The Sacred Dragon Emperor revealed a thoughtful expression and analyzed. You first killed the puppet supported by the 9 Suns God Emperor, then destroyed the god of the underworld's clone in the Heavenly Lion region. In this way you have declared war on the 5 God Emperors. I believe that the 5 God Emperors all know about your recent situation and will definitely be on their guard against you. Furthermore, the 5 Great God Emperors might even use crafty plots and machinations to try and intercept and ambush you. You must be very careful when you venture into the various galaxies in the future. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and smiled. Senior, don't worry. Those foreign tribe divine kings and God Emperors clones cannot do anything to me. As long as the 5 God Emperors do not attack me, I will be invincible. The Sacred Dragon Emperor nodded slightly and asked again, are you sure that the 5 God Emperors are in the depths of the void and are restrained by something and unable to leave? Of course. Ji Tianxing nodded without hesitation and said firmly, otherwise I would not have been able to roam the void until now. If their clones could move freely, they would have come to kill me personally. The Sacred Dragon Emperor was relieved and asked again, then how many galaxies have you investigated previously? Have you found any information or clues related to your master? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said regretfully, I have investigated a few galaxies and even held the domain leaders hostage and used the power of the entire galaxy to investigate. In the end I did not find anything. The Sacred Dragon Emperor also felt a little regretful and comforted him. Don't be discouraged. We have only found half. Perhaps we can find something in the other galaxies. Ji Tianxing accepted this consolation and nodded. I hope so. After thinking for a while he asked again, Senior, where is the Black Dragon Emperor? Is he still on the Tianque star? A few years ago when he had a super long-distance conversation with the Sacred Dragon Emperor, the Black Dragon Emperor had been on the Tianque star. But today Ji Tianxing had not seen the Black Dragon Emperor. The Sacred Dragon Emperor laughed softly. That guy is not someone who can stand loneliness. He will feel uncomfortable if he stays with me for a few more days. When he came he only stayed for 5 days before leaving. Now he has not returned to the Dragon Realm. I don't know where he is roaming. Ji Tianxing thought about it and agreed. Given the Black Dragon Emperor's character, it was only natural that he would do so. Next, the two of them chatted about some less important topics. After 2 hours, the two of them finally ended their conversation. The Sacred Dragon Emperor summoned a trusted servant and arranged for Ji Tianxing to stay near the Divine Palace. Although the Sacred Dragon Emperor did not ask, he could guess that Ji Tianxing was not alone. He must have brought his family with him. Therefore, the Sacred Dragon Emperor directly arranged for Ji Tianxing to stay in a residence and provided dozens of guards and maids. After Ji Tianxing stayed in the residence, he summoned Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and Ji Wushuang from the distorted spacetime. The 3 of them had been in seclusion to recuperate. Not long ago they had fully recovered and were cultivating. Now that they had been awakened by Ji Tianxing, they had left the distorted spacetime and appeared in a luxurious residence. The 3 of them were puzzled. Wuhan, you woke us up. What happened? Brother Wuhan, where are we? Although Ji Wushuang did not ask, she was equally puzzled. Ji Tianxing smiled and explained, we have already arrived at the Tianque star in the Tianque star region. We are now in the Sacred Dragon Emperor's Divine Palace. Wuhan will be back in 4 days at most. We will be able to see him very soon. Chapter 40-22. After hearing Ji Tianxing's explanation, the 3 of them finally understood the reason. Instantly they were overjoyed and filled with excitement. We have reached the Tianque star? We will be able to see Wuhan soon? That's great. After more than 20 years we can finally see Wuhan. I wonder how Big Brother is doing now. How is he doing? Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and Ji Wushuang were all very happy and couldn't wait any longer. Ji Tianxing comforted them. Don't worry. Under the care of the Sacred Dragon Emperor, Wuhan is doing well and has even become a high-level divine lord. Let's stay here and wait patiently for a few days. We will be able to see him. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and Ji Wushuang finally calmed down a lot. After that, everyone settled down in the residence and meditated to regulate their breathing while waiting for Ji Wuhan's return. Of course, Yun Yao was most worried and concerned about Ji Tianxing. She couldn't focus on her cultivation and had to ask Ji Tianxing every day if Wuhan had returned. Day after day passed just like that. On the night of the fourth day, Ji Tianxing was sitting in meditation in his bedroom. Suddenly, the guard captain of the residence rushed to the bedroom door and reported respectfully. Reporting to Divine King Tianxing, young lord has returned. Ji Tianxing was taken aback by this sudden news. Then he realized that these guards and generals addressed the Tiankui Star Region Lord as Lord Region Lord, but addressed the Sacred Dragon Emperor as Lord. Since the Sacred Dragon Emperor was the master, then the young lord they were referring to was naturally Ji Wuhan. Ji Tianxing was instantly overjoyed. He hurriedly ended his meditation and opened the door. "Where is young lord? Quickly bring me to see him." Ji Tianxing instinctively stepped over the door to look for Ji Wuhan. But the guard captain bowed and explained, "Lord said to ask you to wait for a while. He will bring young lord to see you very soon." Ji Tianxing thought for a while and felt that this was reasonable. Therefore he quickly told Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang the good news. The three of them were currently meditating in the secret chamber when they suddenly heard this good news. All of them were extremely excited. They quickly left the secret chamber and met up with Ji Tianxing in the living room. In fact, the three of them even had to calm down and tidy up their clothes and appearances. Of course, they were not ordinary people, so there was no need for them to dress up. As long as she tidied up her clothes and hair, she would look dignified, elegant, and beautiful. The three of them, along with Ji Tianxing, sat in the living room and waited with a slightly nervous and expectant mood. Not long after, the guards outside shouted, "The lord and the young lord have arrived." Following the shouts of the guards, many guards and maids bowed and retreated to the side. Then Ji Tianxing and the other three looked through the door of the living room and saw two figures stepping into the courtyard and walking towards the living room. The tall and burly figure on the left was the Sacred Dragon Emperor, who was wearing a golden robe and a divine crown on his head. Beside him was a handsome young man wearing a black brocade robe and with his hair tied up in a bun. That young man was 7 feet tall and had a tall and straight figure. His face was handsome and valiant. He had a handsome face, sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. His thin lips were tightly pursed and he was serious in speech and manner. He had a slightly cold aura. When Yun Yao and Ji Ku saw this black-robed young man, they were stunned at first glance and thought that they were looking at a young Ji Tianxing. But at second glance they realized that this black-robed young man's face was 80% similar to the young Ji Tianxing, but his aura was even colder and more outstanding. Without needing anyone to introduce him, Ji Tianxing and the other three recognized the black-robed young man at first glance. It was Ji Wuhan. At this moment Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang were so agitated that they couldn't help but want to rush out of the living room to welcome Ji Wuhan. But Ji Tianxing didn't move, so they could only stand there and watch the approaching Ji Wuhan. In the blink of an eye, the smiling Sacred Dragon Emperor led Ji Wuhan into the living room and stood before everyone. "Long Tian, I have already said that as long as you come to the Tiankui Star, you will be able to see Wuhan. Now that Wuhan is right in front of you, I will also fulfill my promise." The Sacred Dragon Emperor smiled and left the living room after saying that, not wanting to disturb Ji Tianxing and his family's reunion. At this moment the usually calm and composed Ji Wuhan couldn't help but tremble when he saw Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang. He revealed an agitated expression. "No wonder Master said he would give me a surprise. So this is it." As this thought flashed across his mind, his fingers started to tremble in agitation. But he had always been aloof and could remain calm no matter what happened. Therefore he didn't burst into tears from excitement, nor did he rush to his parents, kneel down and kowtow to them, exclaiming that he was finally able to meet his parents. He only gazed at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao with teary and blurry eyes. Then he bowed deeply and said in a sincere tone, "Greetings, father and mother." After bowing seriously, he also bowed to Ji Ku and greeted his younger sister, Ji Wushuang. Even though his reaction seemed to be relatively calm. But in reality the emotions, surprise and emotions in his heart were no less than those of the others. "Wuhan, after more than 20 years I finally see you again. You have suffered all these years." Ji Tianxing looked at the elegant young man and sighed with emotion. Yun Yao's eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She hurriedly took a few steps forward and supported Ji Wuhan. Holding his hand she said, "Wuhan, we finally found you." With Yun Yao taking the lead, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang hurriedly went forward to greet them. They surrounded Ji Wuhan and asked about his well-being. The family was finally reunited. Everyone was emotional and their eyes were filled with tears. especially Ji Wushuang, who was the youngest. Sparkling and translucent tears slipped out of her eyes. "Brother, you have been wandering outside all these years. Without your parents by your side to take care of you, you must have suffered a lot, right?" Ji Wuhan shook his head and reached out to wipe away the tears on his sister's cheeks. He said with a smile, "Don't worry, I have always followed Master. How could I have suffered? But in the past few years I have always been worried about your safety." Everyone stood and chatted for a while. Ji Tianxing asked everyone to sit down and ordered the maids to bring tea and pastries. When the guards and maids had all left and only the family was left in the living room, they spoke freely about their yearning and worries over the years. The emperor had already expected this situation, so he left with the guards in advance and instructed them not to disturb them. He knew that tonight was very important to Ji Tianxing and his family. And that was indeed the case. The family was reunited and they could vent the longing that had accumulated for more than 20 years. They had endless things to say. From Ji Wuhan being rescued by the emperor, to him entering the Tiankui star zone, to his cultivation and growth process. Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang asked him about his experiences from beginning to end. Everyone chatted for the entire night and did not feel tired. Chapter 40-23. The next morning the family was still chatting in low voices. The leader of the guards suddenly announced from outside the living room. "Immortal King Tianxing, Princess Linger is here to visit." Suddenly hearing this news, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others were stunned for a moment, unable to react. Who was Princess Linger? Why was she here to visit Ji Tianxing? However, Ji Wuhan knew what was going on. He quickly explained, "Father, mother, the visitor is my junior sister, Qi Ling." Everyone was enlightened. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. He said to the leader of the guards outside the door, "Let her in." Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang's eyes lit up. They looked at the door expectantly. They had heard of Qi Linger and Ji Wuhan's story before, but they had never seen Qi Linger with their own eyes. Ji Tianxing had used the image recording crystal to show them the image of the sacred dragon emperor, so that they had a vague impression of Qi Linger. However, they had never met Qi Linger in person, so they did not know much about her. Now that they were finally going to meet the real deal, the three of them were naturally filled with anticipation. The door to the living room opened. A fiery red figure about 6 feet tall strode into the living room. Everyone's eyes lit up. They focused their attention on the dazzling red figure. She was about 13 or 14 years old. She was a lively and pretty girl. She was wearing a luxurious fiery red dress, an exquisite headdress and a cute bun. She wore a pair of deerskin boots. She wore a precious divine stone bead chain on her wrists. Her shoulder-length hair was braided into dozens of small braids and tied with a gemstone bead chain. She had a fair and delicate oval face and a pair of clear and bright eyes. She exuded a youthful, fiery and straightforward aura. She had an innate sense of affinity. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and Ji Ku fell in love with this cute little girl at first glance. Only Ji Wushuang was more serious. She looked at Qi Linger from head to toe. She seemed to be observing if this little girl was worthy of her brother. Qi Linger was facing Ji Tianxing and the others. They were strangers she had never seen before. However, she was not afraid of strangers at all. She stood in the middle of the living room gracefully and looked at everyone with a smile. She bowed obediently and said, "Linger greets uncle, aunts and sister Wushuang." Ji Tianxing and his wife smiled and nodded. They were very satisfied with Qi Linger's reaction. They raised their hands and gestured for her to rise. Qi Linger looked at Ji Tianxing and said, "In the past I've always heard senior brother talking about you. Senior brother said that you are the most special and noble father in the world as well as the strongest expert in the world." Linger had thought that her uncle must be someone with a high position and power, someone who was awe-inspiring without being angry. "I didn't expect uncle to be so young and handsome. He doesn't look like senior brother's father but more like his elder brother." After saying that, Qi Linger stuck out her tongue playfully. These were words from the bottom of her heart. She did not expect Ji Wuhan's father to be so young. Ji Tianxing nodded with a smile. He said to Yun Yao and Ji Ku through telepathy, "This little girl looks so carefree and straightforward. I didn't expect her to be so sweet." Yun Yao and Ji Ku nodded with a smile. At this time Qi Linger looked at Yun Yao and Ji Ku and said sincerely, "According to seniority I should call you aunts. However, I didn't expect the two aunts to be so young and beautiful. They looked like they were in their early 20s. In the past, Ji Wushuang always said that his mother was as beautiful as a fairy. Like the moon in the sky, she was holy and gentle. At that time I didn't believe it. I thought Ji Wushuang missed the two aunts too much. Now that I see it with my own eyes, I know that Ji Wushuang was right. If it wasn't because of seniority, I really want to call the two of you elder sisters. Even though Qi Linger's words sounded impudent, Yunyao and Jiku were actually praised to the heavens. The two of them burst into laughter as they watched the scene unfold before them. Ji Wushuang, on the other hand, frowned slightly. It seemed like she did not like her future sister-in-law's glib tongue. You can call me elder sister if you want. No one is stopping you. Upon hearing this, Ji Tianxing, Yunyao and Jiku looked at each other. They could guess what Ji Wushuang was thinking. They could not help but find it funny. Ji Wuhan was smart. Of course, he knew what his sister was thinking. He looked at his sister apologetically. Then he secretly glanced at Qi Linger. With his eyes, he signaled her to speak less so that she would not anger his parents and sister. See, this was the so-called pig trotter. Qi Linger winked at Ji Wuhan and smiled. She knew what she was doing. Then she took the initiative to greet Ji Wushuang. Holding her hand affectionately, she chatted with her as if she was her biological sister. Sister Wushuang, Ji Wushuang has been quiet all these years. I know he misses his family. Although I try my best to make him happy, I can't help him. The only thing I can do is to accompany him and listen to him talk about his childhood. You are the person he talks about the most. Also, he only smiles when he talks about you. Indeed, Ji Wuhan loved his sister very much. He and Ji Wushuang were twins. They were born at almost the same time. His parents wanted him to be the older brother. They wanted him to be more sensible and responsible. They wanted him to take care of his sister more. He had been separated from his family for more than 20 years. However, the person he was most worried about and missed the most was still his sister. He knew that Wushuang was innocent and did not have much life experience. Sometimes she seemed too naive. Therefore, he was worried that his sister would be at a disadvantage and encounter danger in the dangerous God world. Just now, Ji Wushuang was a little depressed. She felt that her future sister-in-law was too tactful. However, when she heard Qi Linger talk about Ji Wuhan's past and how he cared about her the most, she immediately threw away her unhappiness. She was especially happy. After chatting for a while, the two girls held hands and became close friends. When they saw this scene, Ji Tianxing, Ji Wuhan and the others all revealed smiles. The same thought flashed through everyone's mind. The pure and kind Wushuang is the most trusting and magnanimous. After all, she has never experienced jealousy, hatred and other negative emotions. Not long after, Qi Linger and Ji Wushuang became familiar with each other. She wanted to take Ji Wushuang out to see the scenery around the God Palace. The two of them explained their intentions to Ji Tianxing and Yunyao. Naturally, their parents agreed. However, before Qi Linger pulled Ji Wushuang away, she could not help but persuade Ji Wuhan in a low voice. Senior brother, you are injured and have not recovered yet. Since uncle and auntie are here, they will definitely stay for a while. You don't have to be in a hurry. Recover first and then accompany them. Chapter 40-24. Qi Linger's voice was very soft. However, Ji Tianxing, Yunyao and the others were all god kings. Naturally, they heard it clearly. Everyone could see that Qi Linger's care and concern for Wuhan came from the bottom of her heart. Therefore, they had a better impression of Qi Linger. After Qi Linger left with Ji Wushuang, the living room returned to silence. At this time, Ji Tianxing asked, Wuhan, when did you get injured? How is it? Yunyao and Jiku also asked with concern, Wuhan, how are your injuries? Let me take a look at you. Ji Wuhan waved his hand and explained, Father, Mother, don't worry. It's just some minor injuries. It's nothing serious. In fact, every time I go to other planets to carry out a mission, I will face some dangers and crises. However, I do so because I want to stimulate my potential in danger and seek growth and breakthroughs. Moreover, Master would send 2 Divine King powerhouses each time to protect us in the dark. If we encounter danger that we can't deal with, they will naturally help us. In fact, no secret could be hidden from Ji Tianxing. When Ji Wuhan stepped into the living room, he could see that Ji Wuhan was injured. However, the injury was not serious. He had already treated it. That was why he did not mention it. Besides, he also agreed with Ji Wuhan's thoughts and actions. After all, since he was young, he had experienced countless life and death dangers to hone himself to his current level. He always believed in a simple principle. The sharpness of a sword was sharpened, and the fragrance of plum blossoms came from the bitter cold. A genius who grew up in a greenhouse and did not experience the hardships of life would eventually give up halfway and disappear into the crowd. Take Wu Shuang and Wu Hen as an example. Wu Shuang grew up by her parents' side and had already become a god king. However, her experience were far inferior to Wu Hen's. She was also not as calm, intelligent, and decisive as Wu Hen. As a result, the two children's achievements in the future would probably be higher than Wu Hen's. However, Ji Tianxing, Yunyao, and Ji Ku did not mind. They did not need the two children to achieve much. To them, it was enough for them to withstand all the hardships and dangers. They only hoped that their children could grow up safely and live a happy and worry-free life. As for Wu Hen's experience, it was because they had no choice. Now that Wu Hen had grown up, her wisdom and strength had become stronger, they would also feel gratified and proud. After everyone chatted for a while, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a ray of divine light, which entered Ji Wuhen's body and allowed him to go back and recuperate. Originally, Ji Wuhen would have needed at least 10 days to half a month to recuperate from his injuries. But with the help of the divine light, he would be healed. For the next 3 days, Ji Tianxing and the others stayed in the courtyard, spending their days leisurely. Every day they hearts Wu Shuang's. They become close friends, were they? Friends of Wu Hen's. They were Wu Hen's heart? Other than that, Qi Linger would also pay her respects to Ji Tianxing and his wife every single day, and she even sent them a few gifts. Although they weren't precious treasures, she had spent a lot of time and effort to make them. It was obvious that she cared a lot about Wu Hen, so she was very attentive to Wu Hen's family. Of course, the Sacred Dragon Emperor had a part to play in this. He seemed to have reminded Qi Linger that she had to be respectful and close to Wu Hen's family in order to gain their approval. In short, Ji Tianxing and his family had a good impression of Qi Linger. In the eyes of the lords, the relationship between Qi Linger and Ji Wu Hen was like a match made in heaven. Late at night, Ji Tianxing and his wife had discussed the marriage of their 2 children in private while drinking tea. Ji Tianxing asked worriedly, "Linger is the last known descendant of the Qilin bloodline. Of course she's noble and worthy of our Wu Hen. But they're still too young. Soon we were destined to leave. At that time it would be too cruel to separate the 2 of them. But if we let them be together, it'll be too rushed. What do you think?" Ji Ku was a straightforward person and asked subconsciously, "They just look young, but their actual age is already over 30 years old. Moreover, you already had a fiancé when you were 14 years old. When you were 16 or 17 years old, you've already pledged your life to eldest senior sister." Eldest senior sister, why are you looking at me?" Yunyao couldn't help but roll her eyes at her when she was halfway through her sentence. Yunyao nodded in agreement. "Linger may look young, but she's already mature. She'll make the right choice." There was no need to mention Wu Hen. Compared to the 16 or 17-year-old Tianxing, she was even more outstanding and mature. Back then, when Tianxing was his age, he even boasted to my father at Cloud Soul Palace. Ji Tianxing couldn't help but roll his eyes at her when she was halfway through her sentence. Yunyao and Ji Ku covered their mouths and snickered. Of course, Ji Tianxing had to admit that. When he was young, he was indeed a little impulsive, unsteady, and irrational. Compared to today's Wu Hen, he was less rational, calm, and noble. It couldn't be helped. After all, Wu Hen was his and Yunyao's child. She was just so outstanding and born. After a while, Yunyao suddenly said, "Don't you think that Linger's temperament and personality are very similar to Ku's when she was young?" Ji Ku was stunned for a moment. She pointed at herself and asked, "Is she like me?" Ji Tianxing seriously recalled for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, it's quite similar. But there's something different. Linger is naive, lively, and a little glib-tongued. But overall she's very cute. As for Ku, she's naive, lively, and quick-witted. She's a little dumb, and her personality is a little too straightforward." Ji Ku widened her eyes and glared at Ji Tianxing angrily. "Brother Tianxing, are you saying that I'm stupid?" "Ahem. That was in the past. You're definitely not like that now." Ji Tianxing laughed dryly and quickly defended himself. Ji Ku wanted to cry but had no tears. She was so angry that she punched him. "Then you admit it." Yunyao smiled and said, "Aren't we talking about the 2 children? Why are we exposing each other's shortcomings?" Ji Tianxing and Ji Ku stopped fooling around and joking. With a serious face, Ji Tianxing said, "Give them another half a month. Half a month later we will bid farewell and leave. When the time comes, we'll definitely take Wu Hen away. Only when he's with us can we be at ease and nurture him better. As for Qilinger, we'll see how she chooses. If she's willing to follow Wuhan, it's not a problem for us. It's just that the emperor can't bear to do so. After all, he also loves the two children very much. With the two children by his side in his old age, he'll be happier. If we take both children away at once, he'll probably be depressed for many years. Chapter 40-25. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Ji Wuhan recuperated in the secret chamber for 3 days, and his injuries gradually healed. From the 4th day onwards, he accompanied his parents to wander around the Cloud Sea mystic realm. While admiring the scenery, they talked about the past 20 years. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were very interested in Ji Wuhan's experiences over the past few years. Ji Wuhan naturally wanted to know what his parents had experienced after he was rescued by the sacred dragon emperor. He could feel that his father's current strength and aura seemed to be slightly stronger than his master, the sacred dragon emperor. This made him overjoyed but also shocked at the same time. He could not imagine that his father had become a peak godly king from a heavenly god in just 20 years. This was definitely unprecedented in history and would not be surpassed in the future. In fact, it didn't even seem like a strength that was obtained through cultivation. It was more like a transformation. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others recounted their experiences over the past few years to Ji Wuhan. During this process, Ji Wuhan listened attentively and expressed his opinions from time to time. Occasionally he would ask for guidance. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku's explanations also benefited him greatly. On the other side, Qilinger brought Ji Wushuang to play in the Cloud Sea mystic realm for a few days. They had become good friends. The two of them met up with Ji Tianxing, Ji Wuhan, and the others. Everyone gathered together to play. It was a very happy and harmonious atmosphere. During this period, the sacred dragon emperor also held 2 grand banquets and invited Ji Tianxing and the others to attend. The godly king experts represented by the sky chieftain expressed a warm welcome to Ji Tianxing and the others. The various soldiers and star lords also sent a large number of precious gifts. Ji Tianxing was very happy to get along with his family. He also learned a lot about cultivation and handling matters from Ji Tianxing. As for Qilinger, she also formed a deep friendship with Ji Tianxing. She also respected and admired Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku very much. However, happy times were always short-lived. Unknowingly, another 10 days had passed. Although Ji Tianxing and the others had spent half a month in the Cloud Sea secret realm, they had gotten along very well with everyone. However, all good things must come to an end. In the end, he had to continue his journey and continue his unfinished mission. On the morning of the 16th day, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and Ji Wushuang followed Ji Tianxing to bid farewell to the emperor. Before this, Ji Tianxing had already revealed this intention, and the emperor had already expected it. Even Ji Wuhan and Qilinger had learned of this matter 2 days ago. Early in the morning, the emperor sent Ji Tianxing and the rest off at the square outside the divine palace. Although he was very reluctant to part with Ji Wuhan, whom he had been with for more than 20 years, he was about to leave. However, he understood that Ji Wuhan had been separated from his family for more than 20 years, so he definitely wanted to reunite with them. Therefore, the emperor suppressed his reluctance and sent Ji Wuhan off with a smile. Before he left, he even warned Ji Wuhan repeatedly. Among the thousands of words of advice, only a small portion was related to cultivation. After all, Ji Tianxing was more powerful than him and had more experience in cultivation. He would definitely guide Ji Wuhan well. Ji Wuhan was also very grateful and reluctant to part with his master, the emperor. However, he did not wish to stay in the heavenly leader's star zone and grow up under his master's protection. Many years ago, he had understood that to become a truly powerful person like his father, he had to go through trials and tribulations. Therefore, he agreed without hesitation to leave the heavenly leader's star with his parents. Of course, at the moment of departure, he still solemnly bowed and bade farewell to the emperor. "Master, this time I will be leaving with my parents to travel across the void and explore the world. I don't know when I will be able to return to visit you again. I hope Master will take care of your body and not be too concerned." After he finished speaking, Ji Wuhan bowed respectfully twice to the emperor. The first bow was to thank the emperor for raising him all these years. The second bow was to thank the emperor for his teachings all these years. 3 bows. That was impossible. It was too inauspicious. After Ji Wuhan bowed, he walked over to Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao and stood still. At this moment, Everyone's eyes were focused on Qi Ling'er, who was standing behind the emperor. Everyone present knew that Qi Ling'er and Ji Wuhan were childhood sweethearts. They were deeply in love and devoted to each other. Now that Ji Wuhan was leaving the heavenly leader's star with his parents, no one knew when he would be able to return. Therefore, everyone was most concerned about whether Qi Ling'er would leave with them. Although she was not very powerful and was only a mid-level divine lord. However, by following Ji Tianxing and the rest, she could gain more experience and knowledge. Her safety was also guaranteed. Most importantly, she did not need to be separated from Ji Wuhan. They could still travel together. Thinking of this, there was an 80% chance that Qi Ling'er would leave with Ji Tianxing and the rest. Even the sacred dragon emperor had already mentally prepared himself for this. Although he was very upset and reluctant to part with her. Still, he suppressed his feelings and said to Qi Ling, you have been with Godfather all these years and have been trapped in the heavenly leader's star domain. I'm sure you are already bored. Why don't you leave with Uncle Tianxing and see the beauty of the extraterrestrial universe? It will also increase your experience and knowledge. After the emperor finished speaking, he turned to look at Qi Ling'er behind him. Unexpectedly, Qi Ling'er kept her head lowered. Her fingers were intertwined and she remained silent. Everyone could tell that she was in low spirits. She was also hesitant and conflicted. In fact, when she learned that Ji Wuhan was leaving 2 days ago, she had been in low spirits and thinking about what to do. But until now, she still had not made up her mind and made a decision. Seeing that she did not answer, the emperor asked kindly, Ling, have you not thought of an answer and made a decision? Godfather knows that you are not afraid of how dangerous the extraterrestrial universe is or what hardships you will encounter. You are just worried that Godfather will be all alone after you and senior brother leave the heavenly leader's star. Don't worry. There are so many people in the Cloud Sea mystic realm. Godfather has so many soldiers under his command. How can he be alone? Moreover, Godfather will go into seclusion to cultivate after you leave. Once you go into seclusion, you'll be back by the time foster father comes out of seclusion, right? Not only did the emperor persuade Qi Ling'er, but Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang also tried to persuade her. Although Ji Wuhan did not say anything, he looked at her with a gentle and expectant gaze. However, after a long silence, Qi Ling'er finally made a decision. She slowly raised her head. Her eyes, which were covered with a layer of mist, revealed a clear and determined gaze. She waved at Ji Wuhan and the rest and said with a smile, Senior brother, the road ahead is long. You must be careful and take care of yourselves. Ling'er will stay on the heavenly leader's star to accompany Master and wait for your return. Chapter 40-26. Qi Ling'er's choice was beyond the expectations of Ji Tianxing and the others, but it was also within reason. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Ji Wushuang, Ji Wuhan and the others were all stunned. But after thinking about it carefully, they all looked relieved. Of course, a subtle hint of disappointment flashed across Ji Wuhan's eyes. Everyone knew that Qi Ling'er had no parents and only had her adoptive father, the sacred dragon emperor, as her family. Although she and Ji Wuhan loved each other, they did not break the ice. However, no one had broken through that layer of window paper. She and Ji Wuhan also didn't have a marriage contract or promise. It was indeed a little awkward to leave with Ji Wuhan's family. Her life in the future would be very complicated and many things would happen. If there was any awkwardness and unhappiness between them, she would be in a very awkward position. Most importantly, Qi Ling'er was very filial and sensible. She would never abandon the lonely sacred dragon emperor for the sake of being with Ji Wuhan all the time. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and the others all understood this, so they did not try to persuade Qi Ling'er and respected her decision. The sacred dragon emperor felt even worse. The smile on his face disappeared and he asked Qi Ling'er in a hoarse voice, Ling'er, are you really not going to go out with senior brother? If you stay in the Tiankue star, you will be even more bored than before. And you will not see senior brother for many years. How could Qi Ling'er not know this? But she suppressed the sadness and reluctance in her heart and squeezed out a smile. She said to the sacred dragon emperor, Master, we are still young and have a long life ahead of us. We are not in a hurry. Senior brother has great ambitions, so of course we should encourage and support him to go out into the universe and become a great master like Uncle Tianxing. But I do not have senior brother's unparalleled talent and ambition. I only want to stay by Master's side, chat with you and make you happy. You are Ling'er's only family. Ling'er will never leave you. These sincere words from the bottom of her heart moved the sacred dragon emperor. His old eyes were filled with tears. The tears in Qilinger's eyes were about to fall as well, but she quickly wiped them away with her sleeve. She smiled and waved her hand at Ji Wuhan. Senior Marshal Brother, the outer space is even more dangerous than the Tiankui starfield. Don't neglect your cultivation. When we meet again you must become a divine king. Ji Wuhan knew that she had already made up her mind, so he didn't say anything else. He only nodded heavily and said, Junior Sister Ling. Don't worry, I'll take good care of myself and become a divine king as soon as possible. You also have to cultivate diligently and take good care of Master. Soon I'll be back for you. Just like that, everyone put away their heavy and sorrowful emotions and waved goodbye with a smile. The Sacred Dragon Emperor led Qilinger, the Tiankui region master, and the others to personally escort Ji Tianxing and the others out of the Cloud Sea secret realm. In the vast sea of clouds, everyone stood on the cloud platform and watched as Ji Tianxing and the others boarded the divine ship and disappeared into the horizon. Qilinger stood on the cloud platform as she stared in the direction where the divine warship had disappeared. Before long, the deity-slaying battleship left the Tiankui star. Next, the deity-slaying battleship sailed through the Tiankui star zone at an extremely fast speed. Ji Tianxing's next target was the Tiansu star zone. He steered the divine warship alone. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, Ji Wuhan, and the others all returned to the distorted spacetime of the divine pagoda. Ji Wuhan was no stranger to the distorted spacetime. Before he was rescued by the Sacred Dragon Emperor, he had also cultivated in the distorted spacetime for many years. When he returned to the distorted spacetime, he naturally had a familiar feeling of returning home. However, this home still had some changes compared to the past. Firstly, there were many more people in the distorted spacetime. There were more than 10 strong practitioners and all of them had the strength of a divine king. Secondly, a towering tree had appeared in the distorted spacetime. Furthermore, the towering ancient tree looked extremely mysterious and was emitting an incomparably dense divine power. Ji Wushuang brought her brother to the bloody flame sacred tree and introduced him to the origins and effects of this sacred tree. Then Yun Yao and Ji Ku led him and introduced him to Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Yank and the others. Among these divine king experts, only Bai Long, Qian Yu and Black Dragon were people Ji Wuhan knew from before. After the two sides met, there was inevitably another round of surprised cheers and concern. Even Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Yank and the others, although Ji Wuhan did not know them, also expressed their congratulations and happiness for his return. By the time Ji Wuhan walked around the sacred tree and got to know everyone, 4 hours had already passed. Yun Yao led him back to the bloody flame sacred tree. The family stayed on the same floating platform and prepared to meditate and cultivate. Of course, before they started cultivating, Yun Yao reminded him, Wuhan, you will cultivate by our side in the future. Your father will come to visit us every once in a while. He will also place a huge amount of cultivation resources on each floating platform for everyone to use. If you have any questions during the process of cultivation, you can ask us. If we can't solve them, your father will naturally answer them. If you lack any cultivation resources, you can look for them in that pile of resources. If you need something special or especially valuable, just contact your father. Ji Wuhan nodded. From his mother's words, he understood 2 things. First, not only was his father powerful, but he also had an immeasurable amount of cultivation resources. Second, these experts who could enter the distorted spacetime to cultivate were all his father's friends and trusted aides. Otherwise, his father would not have paid such a huge price and spared no effort to nurture these experts. In addition, seeing that his sister had already become a divine king while he was still a high divine lord, Ji Wuhan also felt the pressure. He secretly made up his mind to cultivate diligently and break through to the divine king realm as soon as possible. His father's subordinates were almost all divine king experts. A divine lord was of no use at all and could not help much. Moreover, he had asked his father before and knew some secrets. His father was already a peak divine king, but he was still cultivating diligently to break through to the highest god emperor realm. In the near future, his father would fight the 5 god emperors and take revenge. At that time, if he was still a divine lord, not only would he not be able to help his father, he would not even be considered cannon fodder. Thus, Ji Wuhan collected his thoughts, took out a large amount of cultivation resources and started cultivating. Seeing that he had entered a state of cultivation, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang did not disturb him and sat nearby to regulate their breathing. The distorted space-time, which had been noisy for a while, returned to silence. The atmosphere was peaceful and auspicious. Everyone entered a state of cultivation and persevered to increase their strength. In the cockpit of the divine ship, Ji Tianqing's divine sense was constantly paying attention to the situation in the distorted spacetime. Seeing that Ji Wuhan quickly adapted to the new environment and new friends and quickly entered a state of cultivation, he was slightly gratified. When the distorted spacetime quieted down, he retracted his divine sense and focused on steering the divine ship. At the same time, he also started to read the jade slip that the sacred dragon emperor had given him. That jade slip contained some information about the heavenly strategies star domain that the sacred dragon emperor had grasped. Chapter 40:27. The sacred dragon emperor had only been to the heavenly plan star domain a few times and had never thought of invading it. However, the heavenly plan star domain was right next to the Tiankui star domain and had once revealed their intention to invade. The sacred dragon emperor had no choice but to be on guard. He ordered his scouts and experts to gather information about the heavenly plan star domain. He had to take precautions to prevent a war with the heavenly plan star domain in the future. The more he knew about the heavenly plan star domain, the more confident he would be. There wasn't much content in the jade bamboo slip, but it was all crucial information. Ji Tianqing only took 15 minutes to finish reading it and had a rough understanding of the heavenly plan star domain. The heavenly plan star domain was much larger than the Tiankui star domain. In the vast starfield there were millions of stars. Among them, there were thousands of stars that were inhabited by living beings. The cultivation culture in this star domain was more advanced, and every star could produce several god-king experts. The 3 heaven dipper grade stars could even give birth to over 10 or 20 god-king experts. There were even countless god-monarch experts. On the surface, there was a 9th stage god-king from a foreign race who was the domain lord of the heavenly plan star domain. However, the truth was that the domain lord had a backer who was also a god emperor from the divine world. The sacred dragon emperor had interacted with the domain lord before and had captured one of his confidants to force some information out of him. It was said that the expert hiding behind the scenes was known as the Nebula Emperor. When Ji Tianqing heard this news, his first reaction was, one of the 5 god emperors in the divine world, Dao Xingyun. Ji Tianqing read the information in the jade bamboo slip and saw the description of the emperor's statue. There were thousands of stars in the heavenly plan star domain, and in every kingdom and city, there were statues of the domain lord and the star cloud emperor. According to the description of the statue, Ji Tianqing could basically confirm that the backer of the heavenly plan star domain was Dao Xingyun. That guy looked like a middle-aged man with a feather fan and a silk headband. He was elegant and gentle. In the past, his most common attire was an exquisite silver robe with stars and a dragon crown. He often held a feather fan in his hand. Compared to the other god emperors, Dao Xingyun was the most gentle and kind. He acted like a gentleman. Even though Ji Tianqing had fought with him a few times, he had never seen him lose his composure or get angry. However, what happened later proved that this person was definitely not a kind person, but a complete hypocrite. The more sanctimonious he pretended to be, the more shrewd he was and the more vicious his methods were. Ji Dao Xingyun's suspicions of Dao Xingyun's heart to Dao. As for Netherworld Emperor God and Emperor God Xiu Luo, they were the same as Dao Xingyun. Ji Tianqing knew that Dao Xingyun and the other god emperors were the same. Their original bodies were in the depths of the void, busy studying the mystery of the gray fog. In the past few hundred years, Dao Xingyun's confidants had met with the Heavenly Policy Region Master to discuss matters and pass on orders. Dao Xingyun had never shown his face and no one had seen his incarnation. However, Ji Tianqing was sure that Dao Xingyun would have received a reminder from the God Emperor of the Underworld and the 9 God Emperor when he was still in the Heavenly Leader Starfield. At this moment, Dao Xingyun might have already sent an incarnation to the Heavenly Policy Starfield. Even if Dao Xingyun's incarnation is in the Heavenly Policy Starfield, it's useless. With my current strength, I'm second only to the 5 God Emperors. I don't fear their incarnations at all. When the time comes, I'll capture the Heavenly Policy Region Master and interrogate him about Master. If Dao Xingyun's incarnation is also there, I'll kill him as well. Compared to the time when he had destroyed the God Emperor of the Underworld's incarnation, Ji Tianqing's strength had increased again. Naturally, he had nothing to fear. Originally, Ji Tianqing needed 3 months to leave the Heavenly Leader starfield and enter the Heavenly Policy starfield. However, the god-slaying battleship was fast enough. He only used 20 days to enter the Heavenly Policy starfield. Between the two starfields was a vast sea of stars. It was a place where almost no one had set foot in. There were many hidden dangers and dangers. When Ji Tianqing steered the god-slaying battleship through that sea of stars, he had encountered void storms, black holes, turbulence, and a group of meteorites several times. If he were to traverse the void with his real body, he would definitely be affected. For safety's sake, he would definitely avoid them. However, he steered the god-slaying battleship. Not only was its defense extremely strong, but its speed was also unbelievably fast. He successfully passed through the void storms, turbulence, and meteorites. He passed through the sea of stars without any mishaps. Such an experience also made him more confident in the god-slaying battleship. After entering the Heavenly Policy starfield, Ji Tianqing did not slow down or stop. He looked for a star to gather information. Through the information that the Sacred Dragon Emperor had, he knew that the Heavenly Policy region lord lived on the Heavenly Policy star. That huge heavenly star-level star was located in the southwest of the starfield. Could be seen from billions of miles away. It was very conspicuous. After determining the direction, he steered the god-slaying battleship toward the Heavenly Policy star. The battleship sailed for 10 days and 10 nights. Ji Tianqing could see a huge shining star in the distant depths of the starfield. That was the Heavenly Policy star. It was like a beacon, a lighthouse in the vast sea. It guided Ji Tianqing forward. The god-slaying battleship flew for another 6 days and successfully arrived near the Heavenly Policy star. When it reached the periphery of the Heavenly Policy star, the god-slaying battleship slowed down and circled the star for a distance. Ji Tianqing carefully observed the situation of the Heavenly Policy star and the surrounding stars. Since Dao Xingyun had already known that he would come, he would most likely have made some defensive preparations. But after Ji Tianqing observed for a long time, he found that the surrounding stars were very normal and peaceful. There was nothing strange about them. Even the Heavenly Policy star was very peaceful. There were no God King experts patrolling inside or outside the space barrier. The Heavenly Policy star is actually so peaceful. Dao Xingyun still doesn't know that I am coming? That's impossible. The god of the underworld and the 9 Suns God Emperor have no reason not to warn Dao Xingyun? Ji Tianqing frowned and thought to himself suspiciously. Could it be? Dao Xingyun knows that I have destroyed the god of the underworld's clone and knows that it will be useless even if he sends his clone. Not only will he not be able to stop me, but he will also lose one of his clones. So he decided to give up on the Heavenly Policy star? The Heavenly Policy region lord has probably already escaped with a group of loyal subordinates? Ji Tianqing pondered for a while and felt that this analysis made sense. But no matter what the result was, he remained vigilant and alert. He steered the god-slaying battleship through the space barrier and flew into the Heavenly Policy star. Swoosh! With a flash of light, the god-slaying battleship entered the interior of the Heavenly Policy star from the dark and cold void. In front of him was a blue sky and a white sea of clouds. Ji Tianqing steered the god-slaying battleship and flew across the sky, heading straight for the continent in the middle. There were 9 continents on the Heavenly Policy star, separated by many oceans. The Heavenly Policy region lord lived in the Heavenly Policy divine residence on the continent in the middle. Chapter 40-28. While flying over several continents, Ji Tianqing released his divine perception to observe the situation on the continents. The continents, divine nations and countless cities were as calm and peaceful as usual. There was no sign of an impending storm, nor was there any sign of danger lurking in every corner, nor was there any sign of panic. The billions of non-human beings were not on guard or aware of the impending danger. It was as usual. Seeing such a scene, Ji Tianqing was a little confused and vigilant. However, after thinking about it for a while, he understood. His first reaction was, why were the non-human beings on the Heavenly Policy planet unaware of the impending danger? Could it be that the God Emperor did not inform the Heavenly Policy region lord? Did the region lord not give any orders for the Heavenly Policy planet's citizens to be on guard or to deploy their defensive forces? However, Ji Tianqing thought again. If the Star Cloud God Emperor had informed the Heavenly Policy region lord, in order not to cause panic and unrest, the region lord would definitely take action secretly or flee. Therefore the ordinary citizens would not know the truth. Only God Kings were qualified to know the inside story. If the non-human beings knew about the impending danger, the heavenly policy planet might experience a drastic change. The citizens would be uneasy and unrest would occur. At that time, the region lord's orders would be hard to pass down, and no plan would be able to be implemented. Of course, even if this speculation was reasonable, it was still just a speculation. Ji Tianxing would only know the truth after entering the heavenly policy divine abode. Half a day later, Ji Tianxing arrived at the central region of the heavenly policy continent. In front of him was an endless mountain range covered by a lush forest. Fog rose above the forest and clouds rolled in the sky. This place was exceptionally rich in spirit qi, but it was shrouded in clouds all year round. Therefore it was very mysterious. This mountain range was hundreds of thousands of miles wide and the terrain was very high. It was the ancestor of the heavenly policy continent's dragon veins. The heavenly policy region lord's cave abode was in the depths of this mountain range. Normally this area was a forbidden area of the heavenly policy continent. No one dared to trespass. Therefore, countless demonic beasts and spirit beasts lived in this resource-rich mountain range. When Ji Tianxing flew the warship over the mountain range, he did not forget to use his spiritual sense to investigate the situation in the mountain range. He thought to himself that the birds and beasts in the mountains would not lie. Whether the region master of the heavenly strategies region was on guard or not, or whether he was plotting something, could be seen from the reactions of the birds and beasts. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The god-slaying battleship also reached the depths of the mountain range and arrived at the entrance of the heavenly strategies divine residence. During this time, Ji Tianxing had traversed over 200,000 miles of mountain range. His divine senses detected that everything was normal in the mountain range. Countless birds and beasts were also unaffected. They continued to roam and move about as usual. This led Ji Tianxing to a conclusion. The birds and beasts in this mountain range aren't frightened, which means that there haven't been a large number of God King experts gathered here recently. This means that the heavenly strategy divine abode did not summon an army or God King experts to reinforce them. This conclusion was further verified when he saw the situation at the entrance of the heavenly policy divine abode. Although the heavenly policy divine abode sounded like a mansion, it was actually a cave abode within the secret realm. There was a large array at the entrance of the secret realm. It was built on the peak of a giant mountain that was 3,000 feet tall. The mountain peak with a radius of 10 miles had been flattened and a plaza had been built. In the middle of the plaza was a sacrificial altar. The large array was in a closed state. The sacrificial altar was guarded by close to 100 divine sovereign guards. The two guards at the front were low-level god kings. These guards were like statues. They did not move an inch as they guarded the sacrificial altar. Their expressions were calm and solemn. The cave abode of a stellar region master only had so few guards. This level of strength was normal. It could even be said that the defensive power was slightly weak. From this, it could be seen that the heavenly policy divine abode did not strengthen its defensive power. It seemed like the guards were still in the dark. Ji Tianxing secretly observed for a while. He realized that these guards were not pretending to be calm. They really did not know that danger was coming. This made him feel more at ease. He thought to himself, it seems like Dao Xingyun has really given up on the heavenly policy region master. In that guy's eyes, the heavenly policy region master's life is not even worth his incarnation. Ji Tianxing had originally planned to hide near the entrance and wait patiently for a while. When someone entered the secret realm, he would turn into dust and sneak into the heavenly policy divine abode. He did not expect to see no one enter or exit the heavenly policy divine abode after waiting for an entire day. Moreover, the large array at the entrance had been closed. It seemed like very few people entered or exited normally. This was normal. After all, the heavenly policy star region had been peaceful for many years. Usually there were no major events. Even if the stellar lords had something to report, they only needed to send a message. They did not need to personally rush to the heavenly policy divine abode. Therefore, Ji Tianxing decided not to wait any longer. He chose to take the initiative to attack. Since Dao Xingyun had already given up on the heavenly policy divine abode, he had nothing to worry about. He could wipe out the entire heavenly policy divine abode with his own strength. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing, who had been hiding and observing, suddenly appeared. He waved his hands and created a divine light that filled the sky, forming a sealing divine array. A golden light barrier with a radius of 5 kilometers descended from the sky and enveloped the entire mountain peak, sealing the plaza. The sudden change startled all the guards. They subconsciously tightened their grip on their Kenshin weapons. The two God King Guard commanders even held their swords in front of them. They were on high alert as they searched for the enemy. However, Ji Tianxing had openly appeared in the middle of the plaza. There was no need for them to search for him. In an instant, everyone's gazes were focused on him. Who dares to behave so atrociously in the heavenly policy divine abode? Everyone attack together and punish him. The two guard commanders sensed Ji Tianxing's strength and aura. They knew that he was a God King expert. Of course, they did not dare to underestimate him. As the two of them shouted and gave the order, close to 100 guards brandished their swords and sabers and surrounded Ji Tianxing. At this moment, Ji Tianxing's divine consciousness moved. The sealing divine array started to operate, releasing a powerful suppressive force. In an instant, the close to 100 guards felt as though they were stuck in a quagmire. It was difficult for them to move. Even the two guard commanders were suppressed to the point that their backs were bent. The circulation of their divine power was very sluggish. Ji Tianxing's figure flashed and rushed into the crowd. His left and right hands sent out sword lights that filled the sky, slashing into the crowd. Following a series of muffled bangs, the close to 100 God Monarch guards fell like wheat being cut down. Most of the guards were killed with a single strike. The sword lights pierced through their heads and godheads. They died on the spot. Only a few guards were slashed by a few sword lights. Their heads were separated from their bodies and divine blood sprayed everywhere. The sounds of bodies falling to the ground were endless. In less than 10 breaths of time, close to 100 guards were all dead. Corpses littered the ground. The two guard commanders were just about to attack when they saw that all the guards had been killed. Moreover, they were also covered in blood. They were scared silly on the spot. They had guessed that Ji Tianxing was very strong, but they did not expect him to be this strong. Chapter 40-29. Ji Tianxing did not wait for the two guard commanders to come back to their senses, nor did he give them a chance to escape. He waved his hand and shot out a few more sword lights. Swish. Bam. Bam. The sound of sword lights piercing through the air rang out as 6 sword lights successfully pierced through the heads of the two guard commanders. Blood splattered everywhere as the two guard commanders died on the spot. Their corpses fell backward and lay at the bottom of the altar. In less than 20 breaths of time, all the guards in the plaza had been killed. Ji Tianxing did not have the time to clean up the battlefield, much less to collect the spoils of war. He stepped onto the altar and used his God's Eye mystic technique to observe the divine array on the altar. In a short while he figured out the trick and activated the divine array. Swish. The altar lit up with a dazzling white light and condensed into a 30-meter-tall light door. He stepped through the white light door and instantly disappeared as he entered the mystic realm. The mystic realm was not big, only about 200,000 miles in radius. However, the mystic realm's environment was very good. There were green mountains and clear waters, flowers and trees, and the spirit chi was very abundant. The most important thing was that Ji Tianxing flew through the sky. Everywhere he went was very quiet and peaceful. During his flight, Ji Tianxing even encountered a group of patrolling guards. The 10 guards were neither fast nor slow. They looked relaxed and natural without any sense of urgency. Ji Tianxing was invisible and had restrained his aura. He was not discovered when he passed by them. From the current situation, the Heavenly Strategy Region Lord was still unaware. The Heavenly Strategy Divine Abode also did not have any defensive measures. Ji Tianxing believed that this operation would be very successful. He flew for about 100,000 miles and arrived at the depths of the mystic realm. He saw a mountain range with many palaces and buildings built on top of it. The palaces with a radius of 1,000 miles should be the residence of the Heavenly Strategy Region Lord. Therefore he quietly landed in the palaces and extended his divine sense to cover the entire palaces. He wanted to find out the location of the Heavenly Strategy Region Lord and then catch him by surprise and capture him. More than 20,000 people lived in this palace complex. The majority were Divine Lord Realm experts. There were also more than 30 Divine King powerhouses. Ji Tianxing would be more than happy to capture the Heavenly Strategy Region Master without alerting those God Kings. After all, it would save him time and effort. However, he did not expect that when he released his divine consciousness to search for the whereabouts of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master, Dozens of miles ahead, at the peak of the most majestic mountain, an abnormally powerful divine aura suddenly appeared. That was the aura fluctuation of a peak divine king. No, it was several times stronger than a peak divine king, and it even carried a trace of the Tao. Ji Tianqing immediately realized that the situation was not good. Someone with this kind of godly aura was most likely an incarnation of the God Emperor. Sure enough, when his divine sense gathered on that aura, he was able to clearly see the source of that aura. It was a male god race cultivator dressed in an exquisite nebula robe and holding a feather fan. This person was handsome and had a graceful bearing. He had 2 strands of beard at the corner of his mouth and was sitting on the throne in the conference hall. When Ji Tianqing's divine sense touched him, he smiled and flew out of the conference hall. Swish! The white-robed man flew to the sky above the palace and looked at Ji Tianqing's hiding place with a smile. He said in a clear voice, "Kenshin, this emperor has been waiting for you here for several months. You are finally here." It was obvious that this white-robed man who called himself this emperor was the incarnation of the God Emperor, Dao Xingyun. Not only had he arrived at the Heavenly Strategy Divine Residence long ago, but he had also discovered Ji Tianqing, who had concealed his aura, and locked onto Ji Tianqing's location. Since he had already been exposed, there was no point for Ji Tianqing to continue hiding. He simply revealed himself and stood high in the sky, facing off against Dao Xingyun from 25 kilometers away. After 1,000 years, the 2 people who had a blood feud met again. Ji Tianqing's expression was cold and his eyes were sharp. Dao Xingyun acted as if nothing had happened. He had a calm expression and a faint smile on his lips as he waved his feather fan slowly. Seeing that the other party was so calm, Ji Tianqing said in a deep voice, "The Heavenly Strategy Star Domain has been peaceful along the way. Everything on the Heavenly Strategy Star Domain is also normal. Even this mystic realm didn't have any abnormalities, both inside and outside. I originally thought that after knowing that I had destroyed the incarnation of the god of the underworld, you would cherish your incarnation and wouldn't dare to come personally. I didn't expect that you would still come and not give up on the Heavenly Strategy Star Domain Lord." Dao Xingyun's incarnation smiled and said calmly, "That's right. The god of the underworld told us about that matter." Everyone was indeed surprised. We couldn't believe that Kenshin, who had been dead for more than 1,100 years, had actually come back to life. Moreover, he had recovered to his peak state and was even stronger than before. But do you think that this emperor would be afraid and ignore the Heavenly Strategy Star Domain? Do you think that this emperor would be afraid of you and give up on the entire Heavenly Strategy Star Domain? You are too confident. You're just a peak god king. If you don't reach the God Emperor realm, you will forever be an ant." Dao Xingyun's calm voice was filled with unquestionable confidence and dominance. After saying that, he clapped his hands as if he was sending out some kind of signal. Following that, the auras of several god kings emerged from the palaces under his feet. The auras of several hundred godly kings abruptly appeared within the palaces and buildings in the dozen or so mountain peaks in all directions. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Those god king experts who were originally hidden, so Ji Tianqing didn't notice them for a moment, flew into the sky one after another and revealed themselves. Ji Tianqing's expression changed slightly. His pupils constricted as he scanned the area with his divine sense. He discovered that more than 600 god kings had appeared out of thin air. One had to know that when he released his divine sense to search the palaces, he only discovered about 30 god kings. But at this time, over 600 divine king powerhouses actually emerged from the palace complex. This was enough to show that the 600 god kings had been hiding here for a long time and had been waiting for his arrival. How could more than 600 god kings have gathered in the Heavenly Strategy Divine Abode? Seeing that these god kings were of different races and that most of them were mid-rank god kings, Ji Tianqing understood. It must be Dao Xingyun who had given the order to gather many star lords to reinforce him. The other party had laid in ambush here to wait for him to appear before joining forces to attack. Dao Xingyun, you are such a scheming person. You are so vicious. Ji Tianqing's gaze swept across the hundreds of god kings and finally landed on Dao Xingyun as he asked in a deep voice. On my way here, the entire star domain Heavenly Strategy Star, and this mystic realm were very peaceful. There were no flaws at all. How did you do it? You were able to gather so many god kings without anyone noticing anything amiss? Not only this mystic realm, But even the entire heavenly strategy star was cooperating with you to put on an act? Dao Xingyun, your scheming and methods are even better than back then. Facing Ji Tianxing's questioning, Dao Xingyun smiled calmly and explained, I had given the order to keep it a secret. Very few people knew about this, so it was naturally kept secret. The entire star domain and the people of Heavenly Strategy Star didn't know about it, so how could the news be leaked? Chapter 40-30. The citizens of the Heavenly Strategy Star do not know, and the guards of the Heavenly Strategy Divine Residence do not know either. Even the 600-plus God Kings had secretly gathered there. If even they do not know what is going on, the news can naturally be concealed. Moreover, I arrived here 3 months ago and made arrangements and ambushes in advance. Naturally, everything is going smoothly. As long as you are careful and attentive, you will definitely be able to do it without any flaws. Although Dao Xingyun had said it in a simple and light manner, everyone knew that things were definitely not that simple. Under Ji Tianxing's careful and vigilant state, Dao Xingyun was still able to set up such a perfect ambush and only reveal his true colors at the end. It could be seen that Dao Xingyun had spent a lot of time and effort. This also made Ji Tianxing realize that Dao Xingyun, who was good at scheming among the 5 emperors, had become even more sinister. But things had already reached this stage. Dao Xingyun and the 600 divine kings had heavily surrounded Ji Tianxing. Saying anything else was unnecessary. Only by fighting to the death could they break out of the encirclement. The heavens and earth were silent. The 600 divine kings had already arranged themselves into a huge formation in different directions and surrounded a radius of 1,000 miles. Dao Xingyun waved his feather fan lightly and looked at Ji Tianxing with a smile. He said confidently, Kenshin, you have the ability to destroy the incarnation of the god of the underworld. I admit that I am not much stronger than the god of the underworld. Therefore, if we fight one-on-one, you should be able to defeat this incarnation of mine. However, I will definitely not give you the chance to do so. Now I have mobilized more than half of the Star Lords of the Star Field. 600 divine kings have gathered here. Even if you are a god emperor, you will definitely die, let alone a peak divine king. Give up struggling. I can give you a dignified death. Of course, if you can hand over the exterminating heavens portrait, I can still spare your life. Dao Xingyun was confident that he could restrain Ji Tianxing. With over 600 god kings surrounding him, Ji Tianxing would definitely die. Since victory was in his hands, he naturally had to negotiate terms with Ji Tianxing in exchange for greater benefits. Ji Tianxing secretly sneered but pretended to be stunned. He then sneered in disdain, there are more than 600 Star Lords, so what? They are just a bunch of clay chickens and pottery dogs. Less than 20% of them are high-level divine kings, and 80% of them are middle-level divine kings. What can they do to me? Hee. Dao Xingyun was too lazy to argue with him. He gently waved his fan and smiled, there are so many of us here. You know very well whether we can kill you or not. Why are you putting up a strong front? Don't talk nonsense. Hand over the execution heaven scroll and I will spare your life. Keep your word. Seeing that Dao Xingyun was unwilling to let go of the execution heavens diagram, Ji Tianxing understood that he was very eager for the diagram. However, he could not admit that the execution of the heavens scroll was in his hands. He had to say the same thing as last time. Execution of the heavens scroll? If I had the execution of the heavens scroll, I would have broken through to the God Emperor realm long ago. Why would I need to talk nonsense with you? I originally thought that after I fell, the execution of the heavens scroll was taken away by you. Now it seems that you didn't get it either. How ironic, huh? Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, the smile on Dao Xingyun's face disappeared and he frowned gloomily. He remained silent and stared at Ji Tianxing as if trying to discern the truth of his words. Obviously, he did not believe Ji Tianxing's words. He was not the god of the underworld. He was not so easily fooled. However, Ji Tianxing's expression, tone, and words could not find any loopholes. He was also skeptical. Kenshin, whether you are telling the truth or not, I don't care. After I kill you later, I will carefully examine your body and godhood. By then the truth will be revealed. In the end, Dao Xingyun still maintained his skeptical attitude and waved his hand to give the order to attack. Kill him. Following Dao Xingyun's order, the 600 god kings all waved their swords and Kenshin soldiers and used their ultimate skills to attack Ji Tianxing. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Boom. 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 The dazzling brilliance of the divine skill lit up and illuminated a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The shadows of swords, wind, fire and lightning covered the sky and fell on Ji Tianqing like a flood. Every god king gave it their all and used their ultimate skills that were enough to destroy the heavens and earth. The combined attack of 600 people was enough to turn the palaces in a radius of 1,000 miles into ruins and debris. However, those god kings did not hesitate at all. Their expressions and eyes were filled with determination. They had already received Dao Xingyun's order. Even if they had to destroy this palace, destroy the entire mystic realm, and even destroy the entire heavenly strategy planet, they had to kill Ji Tianqing completely. Once they killed Ji Tianqing, it would be a great achievement that would leave their names in history. They would also be the biggest obstacle and threat to Dao Xingyun and the other god emperors. In comparison, the heavenly strategy planet was not that important. Facing such a fierce attack, Ji Tianqing did not hesitate to use his teleportation technique to escape from the encirclement. He knew clearly that no matter how strong he was, he would not be able to withstand the attacks of 600 god kings. Moreover, Dao Xingyun's incarnation was still eyeing him covetously and could attack at any time. Right now he was not thinking about how to kill all these god kings. Instead he was thinking about how to escape so that he could escape from their pursuit. Of course, only by breaking through the encirclement of so many god kings and lengthening the battle line would he have a chance to counterattack. Swish. Ji Tianqing used his powers to cast a spell as a dazzling white light surged from his body. He was about to tear open space and teleport. However, Dao Xingyun and a few hundred god kings had already set up a sealing array in this area. Ji Tianqing only felt that he was in a quagmire. It was difficult for him to move, and the difficulty of tearing open space had increased exponentially. Fortunately, his divine power was vigorous enough, and he had the indestructible golden body to protect him. Even if forcefully tearing open space would damage his divine body, he did not care. Swoosh! A white light flashed. 1 second later, Ji Tianqing passed through the sky full of sword shadows and lightning, successfully tearing open space and teleporting thousands of miles away. Although he had used up a lot of his divine power, his face was pale and he was panting a little. He had successfully broken through the encirclement and caused the attacks of a few hundred god kings to fail. Boom, 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 boom. He was in the sky thousands of miles away. When he turned his head to look, he saw the overwhelming radiance of divine techniques landing on dozens of mountains and palaces, causing flames and dust to erupt into the sky. At least 20 mountains were blasted into smithereens and collapsed into ruins. Those exquisite and dignified palaces were also blasted into smithereens, leaving behind dilapidated walls and dilapidated walls. There were also thousands of guards and servants who did not manage to retreat in time and were accidentally injured by the god kings. They died tragically on the spot, not even leaving behind ashes. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing understood how determined Dao Xingyun was to kill him. Hundreds of god kings had failed to injure Ji Tianqing with their attacks. Instead they had killed many of their own. They were all ashamed and angry. Without needing Dao Xingyun to give the order, they spread out and formed an even bigger encirclement as they charged towards Ji Tianqing. Chapter 40-31. Ji Tianqing had already been surrounded once. How could he be surrounded a second time? When hundreds of godly monarchs rushed over, he took out the burial of heaven without hesitation and used his ultimate skill. Sword rain. The burial of heaven pointed the sword to the sky. As he shouted, tens of thousands of silver light spots appeared in the sky. From afar, the silver light spots covered the sky like a meteor shower. However, as the silver light spots fell rapidly, everyone saw that they were more than 80,000 starry swords. Each starry sword was more than 20,000 feet long. They were more dazzling than the meteors and more violent. When hundreds of godly monarchs caught up with Ji Tianqing and were about to surround him, the 80,000 starry swords finally descended. Soon the starry swords covered a radius of 30,000 miles. Everyone was enveloped by the starry swords and was about to be blasted into smithereens. However, at this moment, Dao Xingyun, who had been calm all this while, frowned as his face turned gloomy. This was because he could clearly feel the terrifying power of the starry swords. If he did not resolve it, more than half of the hundreds of godly monarchs would be killed. He had no choice. Ji Tianqing's ultimate skill was too destructive. It was an area attack and was most suitable for group attacks. Starry sky. At this critical moment, Dao Xingyun formed a seal with his left hand and waved his feather fan with his right hand. He used the power of Heaven Wei with all his might. Swoosh. A trace of rainbow-colored Daoist rhymes circled above his head. The power of the way of the heavens that he released gathered the endless power of the stars in an instant, forming thousands of light balls in the air above everyone's heads. Each light ball had a diameter of 30,000 feet. They shone with silver light like stars. More than 5,000 silver stars covered the entire sky and became the first barrier against the starry swords. Just as the 5,000 stars were formed, more than 80,000 starry swords came down and clashed with each other. Bam, 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 bam. An earth-shattering explosion erupted, shaking the heavens and spreading throughout the entire secret realm. At that moment, the huge silver ball of light and the huge sword of stars collapsed and exploded at the same time, splashing out endless fragments of starlight. Incomparably violent hurricanes mixed with fragments of starlight swept out in all directions for tens of thousands of miles. The surrounding mountains and forests were all destroyed into ruins. Endless dust surged into the sky like huge waves, covering the sky and the sun. In just one breath's time, the thousands of stars released by Dao Xingyun were all shattered by the starry sword. Although the great starry sword had also shattered quite a bit. However, there were as many as 80,000 swords. Even if 20,000 swords were destroyed, there would still be 60,000 swords left. Without a doubt, these 60,000 giant swords all smashed into the ground, covering 30,000 miles of ruins. A new round of earth-shattering explosions erupted. Rumble. Dust and dirt flew into the air again and huge waves surged into the sky, mixed with a torrent of divine light. The sound was just too terrifying. It completely drowned out the screams and howls of the god kings. Dozens of weaker mid-level god kings were unable to dodge in time, nor were they able to block the starry swords. These unlucky fellows were all hit by at least a few swords. Their godly bodies were shattered on the spot and even their god heads were shattered. There were more than 40 god kings who died on the spot. There were more than 100 god kings who were heavily injured and badly mutilated by the giant swords. There were also more than 200 god kings who suffered lighter injuries. There were only about 100 god kings who were lucky enough not to be injured. Firstly, there were more than half of them who were high-level god kings. Secondly, Dao Xingyun saw that the situation was not right, so he used his ultimate skill in time to neutralize many of the starry swords. However, even so, the god kings still suffered heavy casualties after a round of attacks from the starry swords. When the earth-shattering explosions gradually subsided, the dust that covered the sky dissipated and peace returned to the world. At that moment there were only 600 god kings who were still alive and most of them were injured. Dao Xingyun's face grew gloomier and gloomier. He could no longer maintain his composure. He looked around fiercely and chased after Ji Tianxing's figure. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing had already escaped from the battlefield. He flew tens of thousands of miles away and was running towards the exit of the mystic realm. Seeing this, Dao Xingyun was not in a hurry to chase after him. He sneered and said, "Since you came in, you still want to escape? You're too naive. The entire mystic realm has been sealed by a divine formation set up by me. I don't want you to return." As he said that, Dao Xingyun waved his hands and conjured a divine art. He sent out a few strands of heaven Dao power into the surrounding heaven and earth. Suddenly, the edges of the mystic realm lit up with dazzling 5-colored divine light. They quickly gathered in the sky and formed a huge light shield. A supreme-grade king-level sealing divine formation was activated just like that. As the formation started to operate, a boundless formless power descended from the sky. Under Dao Xingyun's control, the sealing power of the sealing divine formation was mainly concentrated on Ji Tianxing. Everyone could clearly see that Ji Tianxing, who was originally flying at high speed, suddenly slowed down and fell from the sky. The facts proved that Dao Xingyun did not lie and there was no need for him to lie. He led the 600 surviving god kings and chased after Ji Tianxing at a moderate pace. Ji Tianxing saw that the supreme-grade sealing divine formation of the mystic realm could not be broken in a short period of time. Hence he could only turn around and fight. In order to break through the sealing divine formation, the best way was to kill and destroy the entire mystic realm with the help of the shockwaves from the fight between him and Dao Xingyun. Dao Xingyun, you forced me to do this. You want to trap me with 600 divine kings in the formation? Then I'll kill all of your lackeys. Ji Tianqing's face was cold as he growled with a murderous look. He took out the thunderclap hammer and held it in his left hand and the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. His body was burning with golden flames. At the same time he opened the Sword World and Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda to release Yunyao Jiku and the others. Everyone knew that Dao Xingyun and a few hundred divine kings had ambushed him and they were very worried about his safety. Especially Yunyao Jiku and the others. No matter what, they had to join the battle and help him. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to agree and remind everyone to be careful and not let anything happen to them. Of course, everyone who joined the battle was at the Divine King realm. Ji Wuhan, the left emissary Jin, and the Blood Dragon right emissary had not reached the Divine King realm yet, so they stayed in the distorted spacetime to cultivate. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. As rays of white light flashed, everyone appeared one after another. After they saw the situation clearly, their faces were as solemn as their hearts. However, their eyes were very determined and there was no fear or cowardice in them. They all waved their divine weapons and charged towards the divine kings without any regard for their own safety. Ji Tianqing was worried about everyone's safety. Hence he took the lead and charged out. He used all his strength to perform his ultimate skills and charged towards Dao Xingyun and the other high-level divine kings. Meanwhile, Yunyao Jiku and the others focused on dealing with the mid-level divine kings. Chapter 40-32. Absolute Shadows of the 10 Directions. Ji Tianqing would always use this very practical move whenever he was outnumbered. As he roared, his body glowed with divine light. 9 identical figures appeared around him. As a result, the 10 Ji Tianqings charged into the battlefield with murderous intent. They rampaged through the crowd of several hundred god kings and crushed them wantonly. 10,000 swords. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Sky-splitting sword. Daylight sword. Sword breaking 9 heavens. God-slaying sword. Ji Tianqing and his 9 clones used different sword Dao ultimate moves. Sword lights filled the sky as they slashed into the crowd. At the same time they waved their divine hammers and shot out lightning pillars and fireballs at Dao Xingyun. Dao Xingyun was indeed very powerful. No matter what divine arts Ji Tianqing used, he would be able to resolve them easily. He would not be injured at all. However, Ji Tianqing had too many clones. 2 of them were tasked with holding him back. They used all kinds of divine arts and ultimate moves to surround and attack him crazily. Dao Xingyun could protect himself and would not be injured. However, he was held back and could not support the hundreds of god kings. Hence, as time passed, the battlefield was gradually split into 2. On one side, Ji Tianqing's original body and 7 clones led Yunyao Jiku, and the others to deal with the hundreds of god kings. On the other side of the battlefield, tens of thousands of miles away, Ji Tianqing's 2 clones attacked Dao Xingyun without caring about anything else. Although the 2 clones and Dao Xingyun were evenly matched in the battle, Dao Xingyun's strength would gradually weaken. However, as time passed, the power of the clone would continue to weaken, and it would eventually be defeated by the nebula. On the other side, the Heavenly Strategy Region Lord led 600 god kings to surround and attack Ji Tianqing and the others. They had the upper hand. In the beginning, Ji Tianqing led the charge. He was like a sharp blade that pierced into the battlefield, killing many alien god kings. However, after he killed over 30 god kings, the remaining 500 god kings surrounded them. Not only were Yunyao Jiku and the others trapped and unable to break out of the encirclement, but they were also unable to kill their opponents. Even Ji Tianqing and his avatar were besieged by many alien god kings. They were unable to break through the encirclement. Moreover, he had to take care of Yunyao Jiku Ji Wushuang and the others. He was afraid that their lives would be in danger. As a result, his lethality was further reduced, and it was difficult for him to go on a rampage. The battle had entered a stalemate. Ji Tianqing was safe and sound. No divine king could harm him. However, Yunyao Jiku and the others started to get injured and bleed. Their strength also started to weaken. After an hour of fighting, the beautiful women's hair was disheveled, and their clothes were dirty and stained with blood. White Dragon Chao Qingyu Baifeng and the others were also injured. However, they did not have the time to treat their injuries. The one who was injured the most was Yank, who was the most ferocious in every charge. He was the biggest and his fighting style was too bold. He was too ferocious and not agile enough. As a result, after an hour of fighting, his body was covered in wounds. Blood dyed him red. Fortunately, those wounds were not fatal. He only looked more miserable, but he could still continue fighting. In the blink of an eye, 2 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing's 2 avatars were greatly weakened. Soon one of them was defeated by Dao Xingyun. No matter how ferocious the remaining avatar's attacks were, it was very difficult for it to hold back Dao Xingyun. On the other side of the battlefield, Ji Tianxing and the others had killed nearly 100 divine kings. They had also paid a certain price. If the stalemate continued, Dao Xingyun would come to help after destroying the avatar. By then Ji Tianxing and the others would be defeated even more miserably. Especially Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu and the others. Not only would they be severely injured, but they might even be killed. Therefore Ji Tianxing made a decisive decision. Retreat. He and his 7 avatars no longer charged forward. They started to cover Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others as they gathered together. This process was very difficult. It also took 100 breaths to complete. After everyone gathered together, he and his 7 avatars formed a defensive circle to protect everyone. They covered everyone as they returned to the distorted space of the divine pagoda. Although everyone was very worried about his safety, they were still worried about him. However, everyone knew his plan. They also understood that it would only be more dangerous if they continued to fight. Therefore they all entered the divine pagoda. Swish, swish, swish. As rays of white light flashed, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others disappeared one after another. After everyone returned to the distorted space, Ji Tianxing then led his 7 avatars to break out of the encirclement. Sword breaking the 9 heavens. Sword of annihilation. Blade of space-time. Ji Tianxing and his 7 avatars swung their swords at the same time. They used a sword Dao divine ability that could destroy heaven and earth and slash towards the group of divine kings in the south. Boom, boom, boom. Amid the deafening sound, a huge gap was torn open in the encirclement. Blood and dust splattered everywhere. More than 20 divine kings of the foreign races were sliced into pieces by the sword light. Their broken limbs were scattered all over the ground. Swish. The 7 avatars instantly merged and returned to Ji Tianxing's body. He went through the gap in the encirclement alone and tried his best to escape to the mystic realm's exit. It was too late for the 470 or so foreign god kings to stop him. All they could do was chase after him. In fact, Ji Tianxing did not think that he would be able to break out of the encirclement and escape from the mystic realm by breaking out of the encirclement. He did this because he wanted to shake off the few hundred divine kings of the foreign races and fight Dao Xingyun alone. After all, Dao Xingyun's speed was much faster than those divine kings. As expected, Ji Tianxing reached the mystic realm's exit after flying for 80,000 miles. At this moment, the few hundred injured and panicking divine kings were still about 40,000 miles away from him. However, Dao Xingyun's avatar had already teleported over and caught up with Ji Tianxing. Trying to escape? Stay behind. Dao Xingyun shouted angrily when he was still 10,000 feet away from Ji Tianxing. He held a silver dragon-engraved divine spear with both hands and stabbed it at Ji Tianxing. He did not use his weapon when dealing with Ji Tianxing's 2 avatars because he felt that Ji Tianxing's avatars were not worthy of him using his weapon. However, when he saw that the Star Lords had suffered heavy casualties, he decided to end the battle quickly and took out the silver dragon-engraved divine spear. This spear was also a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact, but it was not congenital. It was forged by Dao Xingyun after he became a god emperor and forcefully fused his Daoist aura with it. This was one of his natal divine artifacts, and its power was not inferior to a supreme-grade divine artifact that was congenital. It was very fierce. Swoosh. As soon as the godly spear appeared, 2 silvery dragon shadows that were thousands of feet long charged towards Ji Tianxing with the power to destroy the heavens and earth. The silver dragon shadows also contained the power of the heavenly Dao and released a powerful pressure. This time Dao Xingyun was serious. He attacked with all his strength in order to kill Ji Tianxing as soon as possible. He originally thought that by using the power of the heavenly Dao he would definitely be able to suppress Ji Tianxing and greatly weaken Ji Tianxing's strength. He did not expect that the power of the heavenly Dao would not affect Ji Tianxing at all. Chapter 4033. The power of the heavenly Dao had a natural pressure on all living beings below the God Emperor realm. Even ordinary peak stage god kings would be afraid and their combat strength would be greatly reduced. However, Ji Tianxing was rather special. He was actually immune to the pressure of the heavenly Dao. Previously he had even mocked himself. This was probably the compensation the heavenly Tao gave him, right? After all, he had made merit several times but did not receive any rewards from the heavenly Tao. Originally, Dao Xingyun's 2 spears were bound to succeed, making it impossible for Ji Tianxing to dodge or block. Even if he could not kill Ji Tianxing, he could still injure him. However, he did not expect Ji Tianxing to not be affected by the pressure at all. His figure flashed and moved 10,000 feet horizontally, brushing past the 2 silver dragon spear shadows. Such a scene was extremely thrilling. If there was any mistake, the 2 silver dragon spear shadows would stab him. As for Ji Tianxing, he naturally had his own reasons for doing so. The 2 silver dragon spear shadows locked onto his soul aura. If he teleported 5,000 kilometers, the 2 spear shadows would definitely turn and continue to chase after him. However, when the silver dragon spear shadows approached, he suddenly teleported 10,000 feet and dodged the spear shadows. As a result, the 2 spear shadows did not have time to turn and chase after him. They stabbed at the 5-colored light wall behind him. The 5-colored light wall that was like a sky curtain was the sealing array set up by Dao Xingyun. Kaboom! In the next moment, the 2 silver dragon spear shadows pierced the 5-colored sky curtain at the same time, producing a deafening sound and splashing divine light fragments all over the sky. Without a doubt, the silver dragon spear shadows were more powerful. They pierced 2 huge cracks in the 5-colored light wall, creating a gap. Then the silver dragon spear shadows were also shattered, producing countless silver light fragments. Seeing this scene, Dao Xingyun instantly came to a realization and guessed Ji Tianxing's scheme. He immediately cursed. "Damn it! Kenshin, you sinister and despicable person." As expected, Ji Tianxing ignored him completely. His figure flashed and shrank into a speck of dust. He passed through the gap in the 5-colored light wall and escaped the sealing array. Shwa! He rushed to the exit of the secret realm and unleashed a beam of divine light with a wave of his hand to open the exit. A blazing white door of light appeared, hovering above an altar. Without hesitation, Ji Tianxing stepped through the light door and escaped from the secret realm. At this moment, Dao Xingyun, who had regained his senses, chased after him with his spear, and fiercely thrust out a few spear shadows. However, Ji Tianxing was one step too slow. Those few spear shadows crashed into the blazing white light door, but Ji Tianxing had already disappeared. Damn it! Seeing this, Dao Xingyun cursed loudly. He didn't want to waste time repairing the damaged altars and divine formations, and opening the exit of the secret realm. He waved the silver dragon divine spear and tore apart the spatial barrier of the secret realm, creating a pitch-black spatial crack. Of course, this spatial rift didn't lead to the outerium. There were several layers of folded space. After passing through those layers of folded space, one could leave the secret realm and appear at the square at the entrance of the secret realm. Shwa! With the protection of the heavenly energy, Dao Xingyun wasn't afraid of the void and folded space at all. His figure flashed as he plunged into the darkness. Before long, more than 400 godly kings of the foreign races had caught up. However, when they saw the damaged altar and the spatial rift that had yet to heal, they all stopped in their tracks. What should we do? Do you still need to ask? Of course, we should chase after him. But if we pass through that spatial rift, we might be smashed into pieces. What are you waiting for? Quickly repair the altar and restart the divine formation. The godly kings of the foreign races looked at each other, not knowing what to do. At this critical moment, the region master of heavenly strategies forced himself to endure the heavy injuries and decisively gave the order. Hence, dozens of high-level godly kings joined forces and cast spells to repair the altar in the shortest time possible. Shwa. After the region master of heavenly strategies reactivated the divine formation, a blazing white door of light appeared again. Let's go. The region master of heavenly strategies shouted as he took the lead and stepped through the door of light. He led the group of godly kings out of the secret realm. However, when they appeared at the square at the entrance of the secret realm, they could only look at the surrounding sky in a daze. The square was very peaceful and the surrounding sky was also quiet and peaceful. There was nothing unusual. As for Ji Tianxing and Dao Xingyun, they had already disappeared. No one knew where they had gone. Region Master, what should we do now? It's over. That Kenshin has escaped. Don't worry. Kenshin can't escape. Lord Supreme has already chased after him. But is it appropriate for us to stay here and let Lord Supreme chase after him? Of course we have to help Lord Supreme attack Xianxia. But who knows where they went? A group of godly kings of the foreign races surrounded the region master of heavenly strategies. They were so anxious that they could only rub their hands and stomp their feet. However, there was nothing they could do. At this critical moment, they still had to rely on the region master of heavenly strategies. Under everyone's gaze, he took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to Dao Xingyun's incarnation to ask for directions. Soon Dao Xingyun sent a message back and reprimanded him. Useless thing. You are at a loss when faced with such an emergency. What a useless thing. Can't you calm down and observe the sky carefully? When I left, I clearly left a mark. After reading the contents of the communication jade slip, the region master of heavenly strategies finally understood. He hurriedly observed the surrounding sky and found that there was indeed a trace of 5-colored divine power left in the southeast sky. That trace of divine power couldn't be seen with the naked eye. It was like a thread floating in the sky, but it wouldn't be blown away by the wind. The region master of heavenly strategies was instantly energized. He waved his hand and said, I have found the direction. Everyone follow me. As a result, he led more than 400 alien god kings and charged towards the southeast in a grandiose fashion. Southeast of the heavenly strategies' divine abode, about 300,000 miles away. Above the white sea of clouds, Xianxia was like a streak of light that sped through the air. 10,000 miles behind him, Dao Xingyun's incarnation was hot on his heels. Both of them burst forth with their fastest speed. They were even faster than a shooting star streaking across the sky. In a short period of time, both of them couldn't pull apart the distance between them. Dao Xingyun also couldn't intercept Xianxia. Thus, Dao Xingyun didn't forget to send a voice transmission while chasing Xianxia. He roared, Xianxia, no matter how fast you run, it's useless. I spent so much time and effort to set up this perfect trap just to kill you in one fell swoop. Do you think you can escape? To tell you the truth, I have set up a huge array to seal the entire heavenly strategies star. No matter what, you can't escape from the heavenly strategies star. Xianxia understood Dao Xingyun's nature. Of course, he knew that he wasn't lying. If he said he would do it, then he would do it. You used the heavenly strategies star as a disk array to seal the entire star just to kill me? Dao Xingyun. You are really deranged. You are willing to do anything. Have you ever thought that this will destroy the entire heavenly strategies star and cause hundreds of billions of lives to be buried with you? Xianxia's expression was gloomy as he cursed fiercely. Seeing his reaction, Dao Xingyun immediately sneered proudly. Who are you? You are Xianxia. So what if I sacrifice a heavenly strategies star? As long as I can kill you, those hundreds of billions of lives will be buried with you. It is their honor. Chapter 40-34. Dao Xingyun was laughing and his voice was a little noisy. But the content of his words was bone-chilling and made people's hearts palpitate. Xianxia didn't have any sense of acknowledgement or familiarity with the alien creatures in the outer realm. But the billions of living beings on the heavenly policy planet were all living beings. If the roles were reversed, he would never sacrifice billions of lives to kill Dao Xingyun. This was the difference between Xianxia and the top experts and the 5 god emperors. In the eyes of the top experts and the 5 god emperors, everyone below the god emperors were ants. No matter how many died, they didn't feel anything. Because they saw themselves as gods, omnipotent gods who ignored life and lived as long as heaven and earth. But Xianxia was different. Even though he had been a god for so many years and had recovered to the 9th level of the Divine King realm, he was still a human. His humanity hadn't been erased and still existed firmly. Of course, Xianxia also knew that Dao Xingyun's views were deeply rooted and couldn't be persuaded. Now that he was being chased by Dao Xingyun, it was even more impossible for Dao Xingyun to give up. In order to get rid of Dao Xingyun, Xianxia unleashed 120% of his power and raised his speed to the limit. Dao Xingyun also wanted to speed up and kill him, but using the teleportation divine ability overloaded would increase the consumption of his divine power. The power of this clone was fixed. If it was consumed too quickly, its combat power would be greatly reduced. At that time it would be unknown whether he could still kill Xianxia. Therefore, Dao Xingyun could only suppress his anxiety and watch Xianxia get further and further away from him. Although Xianxia pulled away from him, he didn't panic and definitely wouldn't let Xianxia escape. He immediately ordered his subordinates guarding the heavenly policy planet to activate the sealing array at the same time. 2 months ago when he set up these arrays he had thought of this result. Now it came in handy. Swoosh. Swish swish swish. Almost at the same time, more than 300 grand formations scattered all over the heavenly policy planet were activated. Thousands of divine lords had cast over 300 arrays together. They absorbed the power of heaven and earth and condensed into a massive canopy that extended in all directions. Thus, all of the living beings on the heavenly strategy planet and all of the continents could see a gigantic 5-colored sky that encompassed the entire world slowly rise into the air. The entire heavenly policy planet became colorful and dazzling. However, between the heavens and the earth, there was an invisible force that imprisoned the air. The air seemed to have become viscous and the space seemed to have solidified. Hundreds of millions of non-humankind civilians were woken up. They were panicked, confused, and anxious by the sudden change. Fortunately, other than sealing the world and making people feel extremely oppressed, the 5-colored sky curtain did not cause any damage. Although the people of the various continents were confused, anxious, and worried, they were not in a state of chaos. The battle between Ji Tianxing and Dao Xingyun had just begun. Shua. Ji Tianxing was still flying high in the sky, but his flying speed had obviously decreased by a lot. Besides, it was extremely difficult for him to use the teleportation divine power. It consumed a few times more divine power than before. The creatures of the non-human kind weren't scared because they weren't flying at full speed, so they didn't realize the terrifying power of the sky-covering array. However, Ji Tianxing was flying high in the sky. The faster he was, the stronger the suppression of the sky-covering array became. When he used teleportation, it was equivalent to fighting against the sky-covering array, so he was naturally suppressed and locked down by the most powerful suppression. When he slowed down, Dao Xingyun's speed wasn't affected at all. Among the billions of living beings on the heavenly policy planet, he was the only one who could move freely without being affected by the sky-covering array. After all, he was the creator and controller of the super divine array. Swish. After chasing for 1,000,000 miles, Dao Xingyun finally caught up with Ji Tianxing and blocked his path. The two of them stopped high in the sky and stood 1,000 miles apart, facing each other with murderous intent. Dao Xingyun looked at Ji Tianxing with a cold smile and asked, "Kenshin, this is the first time I've used the sky-covering array that I've researched in my early years. Are you satisfied?" Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, using the entire planet as the disk and hundreds of divine arrays as nodes to create a super divine array to seal the entire planet is indeed an impressive technique. However, you've spent a few months and commanded countless divine kings and divine lords to work for you. Therefore, this sky-covering array isn't worthy of you showing off. Besides, with this divine array, you can only create some trouble for me. You can't trap me at all. Dao Xingyun had expected him to say this. He couldn't help but sneer. That's right. A divine array to seal the entire planet is considered a top divine array technique, but it's not the strongest. After all, using many planets as a divine array to seal and mobilize a sea of stars or a river of stars is the top divine array technique. However, don't forget that I'm just a clone. If I'm here in person, I can even seal half of the heavenly policy starfield with the divine array. Indeed, using the river of stars as the disk and the planets as the foundation was the top divine array technique in the world. Only God Emperor experts could use it. Even Kenshin at his peak couldn't do it. However, when Ji Tianxing heard Dao Xingyun's words, he couldn't help but sneer. If you were here in person, you would have killed me already. Why would you talk so much nonsense? However, why did you only send a clone here? Where's your real body? Why didn't you do it yourself? What kind of power is binding and sealing you? Or are you guys carrying out some unspeakable conspiracy? Ji Tianxing looked askance at Dao Xingyun. His eyes were cold and sharp as if he wanted to see through Dao Xingyun. Dao Xingyun immediately frowned, his heart skipping a beat. He couldn't help but suspect that Ji Tianxing had guessed something, or had he heard some rumors. However, he and the other 4 God Emperor experts had taken precautions at the Grey Fog's divine array. They had kept the information very well protected. He thought that as long as Ji Tianxing didn't get close to the Grey Fog's divine array, he wouldn't know what they were doing. However, Ji Tianxing's expression and tone proved that he had guessed something. This made Dao Xingyun nervous and worried. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. This is bad. Kenshin has already noticed our plan. If we don't kill him today, he'll definitely try to obstruct and sabotage our plans in the future. I have to inform the other four as soon as possible and let them take precautions and strengthen the secrecy. I can't let them think that I'm the one who leaked the information. There are already some conflicts and suspicions between us. If a rift appears because of this, I'm afraid it will endanger our plan. Dao Xingyun and the other four God Emperor experts were the same. They all viewed the plan as the most important thing in their lives. It was as important as their own lives. They would never allow it to be obstructed or sabotaged. Therefore he was even more determined to kill Ji Tianqing. Chapter 40-35. Dao Xingyun didn't reveal anything when he set up the sky shrouding array. Everything was done in secret. He didn't inform the overlords of the continents or ask the people of the heavenly policy planet to evacuate because he didn't want Ji Tianqing to be alerted. He could only kill Ji Tianqing when he least expected it. And now he was even more determined to kill Ji Tianqing at any cost. Even if he had to destroy the heavenly policy planet and sacrifice billions of lives, he wouldn't hesitate. Kenshin, you still want to trick me into giving you some information and secrets with such a clumsy method? You're too naive. Dao Xingyun sneered and said, so what if you have doubts and guesses? You'll definitely die today. Everything will end. This world and the endless universe will be the territory of the 5 God Emperors after all. Then Dao Xingyun stopped talking nonsense with Ji Tianqing in case he exposed himself. He formed a divine art with his left hand and waved the silver dragon divine spear with his right hand. He summoned the divine power of heaven and earth within a few 100,000 miles and attacked Ji Tianqing. Swish, swish, swish. Within a radius of a few 100,000 miles, the divine energy of heaven and earth swarmed over, transforming into a 5-colored torrent. It condensed into a myriad of divine art lights and shadows, and shot towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing wasn't afraid at all. He completely activated the power of the indestructible golden body. He waved the divine hammer with his left hand and the burial of heaven with his right hand, creating sword auras that filled the sky. He even took out the chaotic primordial bell, which floated above his head to help him resist the attacks of thousands of divine arts. Boom, 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 boom. Divine light shadows blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Endless wind, fire, and lightning bombarded Ji Tianqing with incomparable violence. But 90% of the divine arts were blocked by the chaotic primordial bell and destroyed by Ji Tianqing's lightning and sword auras. The remaining 10% of the divine arts hit him, but they were also blocked by the indestructible golden body. Although he was surrounded by endless flames and seemed to be in danger, he was actually unharmed. But in reality he was completely unscathed. The divine art attacks formed by divine power could no longer harm him. After all, his strength had reached the peak of the God King realm. He had also reached the peak of divine power and the use of laws. Only the power of the heavenly Tao, a power that surpassed divine power and laws, could hurt him. Similarly, Dao Xingyun's avatar was in the same situation. No matter what divine power or how many laws of divine power he used, he couldn't hurt Dao Xingyun. Only a power that surpassed divine power and laws, such as the power of a world, could injure Dao Nebula. In addition, Dao's avatar had a god's divine powers, divine avatar. Ji Tianqing had used up too much of his divine power, but he could still recover it through cultivation and taking medicinal pills. As gods he used, as could use divine used to God's swords breaking the 9 heavens. When the divine arts were broken, Ji Tianqing blocked Dao Xingyun's attack and counterattacked. He waved the divine hammer with his left hand and smashed out endless lightning power. He waved the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand and stabbed out a dazzling sword light. On the surface, Dao Xingyun looked very confident, as if he had a card up his sleeve. In fact, he did not dare to be arrogant, nor did he dare to underestimate Ji Tianqing. His left hand struck out a huge fist radiance and palm shadow, while his right hand waved the divine spear to block the sword light. The two of them chased and fought in the sky. Their figures kept flashing, shifting, and colliding. As the various divine arts collided, there was an earth-shattering sound. The sound waves spread across 100,000 miles. Boundless fragments of divine light exploded, forming a violent shockwave that swept out in all directions. The mountains were collapsing, the ground was breaking, and the sky was cracking and collapsing. The two experts above the peak Divine King stage started an intense fight. They fought until the sun and moon lost their light and the sky was breaking. After a short while, the sky and earth within a radius of 300,000 miles collapsed. The originally blue sky became fragmented and was filled with a large expanse of dark void. Fortunately, the heavenly strategy star was covered by the sky-shrouding formation. After the sky was broken, it wasn't corroded by the void. Otherwise, the broken sky would continue to extend and more holes would be corroded by the void. Tianxing's power was restricted by the sky-shrouding formation and his fighting power was reduced. However, he still fought Dao Xingyun's God's incarnation to a draw. The two of them couldn't do anything to each other. Only their divine power was being depleted rapidly. However, the two of them kept changing their battlefield as they fought and flew at high speed in the sky. The destructive power of the battle's aftermath was very shocking. Wherever they passed, the sky collapsed and the ground caved in. The first hour was fine. The two of them passed through millions of miles of mountains and forests. However, after an hour, the two of them changed their battlefield to a divine kingdom. As a result, that divine kingdom suffered a calamity. Countless cities collapsed along with the shattering of the sky and earth. Countless living beings from other races were crushed by the flames and divine power that filled the sky. They turned into dust and merged with the sky and earth. As for the over 400 divine kings from other races, after they came out of the heavenly strategy divine residence, they followed the traces left behind by Dao Xingyun and finally caught up. In fact, when they were still 1,000,000 miles away from Tianxing and Dao Xingyun, they didn't need to look for the clues left behind by Dao Xingyun. This was because the battlefield where Tianxing and Dao Xingyun fought had shattered the sky and earth. It could be seen clearly from afar. Even in the starry sky, one could see through the colorful sky-shrouding formation and see the huge craters on the surface of the heavenly strategy star. As long as the over 400 divine kings weren't blind, they would definitely be able to meet up with Dao Xingyun. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. 2 hours later, the over 400 divine kings passed through the divine light that covered the sky and earth. They crossed the shattered sky and earth and void and finally arrived at the battlefield. In this period of time, the weaker mid-level divine kings had used up more than half of their divine power. Many of them were injured because of this. It couldn't be helped. Tianxing and Dao Xingyun were both existences that surpassed peak divine kings. Even the aftershocks and shockwaves from the battle between the two of them weren't something a mid-level divine king could withstand. Only high-level divine kings were qualified to participate in this battle. Seeing the over 400 divine kings pass through the battlefield and arrive in front of him, Dao Xingyun became excited. After all, he couldn't defeat Tianxing alone. With the help of so many divine kings, it was almost certain. However, when he turned his head to look, he saw that most of the mid-level divine kings were covered in wounds and looked miserable. They looked exhausted and exhausted. His face instantly turned black. A bunch of trash. You haven't even joined the battle and you're already in such a state. Dao Xingyun cursed softly as his eyes shone with a cold light. In order to maintain his gentle image and not disappoint the divine kings, he didn't curse out loud. Even if he cursed softly, the divine kings wouldn't hear him. Chapter 40-36. The battle between Tianxing and Dao Xingyun was still ongoing. Of course, the battlefield was also constantly shifting. It moved 20,000 miles per second and flew across the sky. More than 400 foreign race godly kings caught up while panting. After seeing the situation clearly, they were somewhat hesitant. Domain Master, are we really going to attack? Well, look. Their divine powers can shatter heaven and earth. Once we come into contact with them, we will be smashed into pieces. Not to mention their divine powers, even the aftershock of their battle can destroy heaven and earth. When we passed through the shattered heaven and earth, many of our brothers were injured by the aftershock. Domain Master, please reconsider. Why don't we stop attacking and form an encirclement on the outside to help Lord Supreme Martial Artist? Yes, this is a good suggestion. Since we have to participate in the battle and do our best to help Lord Supreme, we can't die in vain. Many foreign race godly kings surrounded the heavenly strategy domain master and discussed. Most of them were worried and fearful of Tianxing and Dao Xingyun's methods. After all, the divine powers and the aftershock of their attacks did not differentiate between friend and foe. They destroyed everything indiscriminately. It was only when a clever guy suggested the idea of encirclement and holding the array that the godly kings heaved a sigh of relief and nodded their heads in agreement. However, no one noticed that the Heavenly Strategy Domain Master's face was very dark, and his eyes were burning with anger. Bastards! You cowardly bastards! Obviously, the Heavenly Strategy Domain Master was forcefully suppressing his anger as he cursed and roared in his heart. Do you think Lord Supreme is a fool? Do you think Lord Supreme can't see that you are so timid? If you really do this, I'm afraid Lord Supreme will kill all of you after killing Kenshin. After roaring inwardly for a while, the Region Master of the Heavenly Stratagem Domain shouted with a strong sense of righteousness, "My brothers, our Supreme Master is fighting a bloody battle and is valiantly killing the enemies. How can we shrink back? No matter how strong the enemy is, Lord Supreme is suppressing him. You don't have to be afraid. We have strength in numbers. As long as we work together and fight together, we will definitely be able to help Lord Supreme kill the enemy. Everyone listen up. Charge with me." After an impassioned shout, the Heavenly Policy Region Master waved his divine sword and gave the order to attack. He pointed his sword at Ji Tianxing, who was in the middle of the battlefield, and shouted out words that made people's blood boil. Many high god kings and brave and loyal god kings all charged out like a flood. However, the Region Master of the Heavenly Strategies region stood at his original spot, and there were more than 200 mid-level god kings who were hesitating. When the Heavenly Stratagem Region Lord saw that the flood had lost its tail, he turned his head and looked behind him. He discovered that more than 200 god kings were staring at him. Suddenly, everyone felt very awkward. The Heavenly Policy Region Master was so angry that his face turned ashen. He waved his sword again and roared, "Bastard! What are you waiting for? Charge!" Charge. Those mid-level god kings who were riddled with scars and in a sorry state, looked left and right. They pretended to charge, but they couldn't take a single step. Even though some clever people shouted, "Charge!" and looked as if their blood had rushed to their heads, they didn't move at all. The Region Master of the Heavenly Stratagem Region was so angry that he could only roar fiercely, "I will lead the charge. If anyone dares to slack off, don't blame me for chopping off his dog head first." The Region Master of the Heavenly Stratagem Region Master had no choice but to shout again. He took the lead and charged out. Seeing him brandish his sword and charge into the battlefield to kill Ji Tianxing, only then did the 200 or so middle divine kings slowly follow him. Even though they were shouting blood-boiling slogans, their formation was loose and their morale was low. All of them were hiding and cowering. If it weren't for the sake of stabilizing the morale of the army, the Region Master of the Heavenly Stratagem Region Master would have executed them on the spot. Even though half of the foreign race's god kings were afraid and didn't dare to surround and attack Ji Tianxing. However, the other half of the god kings who were hot-blooded and impulsive actually surrounded Ji Tianxing and attacked him without any regard for their own safety. When Ji Tianxing was fighting with Dao Xingyun, he was suppressed by the heaven-shrouding formation. Now that he was surrounded by 200 god kings, he was in imminent danger. He could only retreat with all his might. Even with the protection of the indestructible golden body and the primordial chaos bell, he couldn't hold on much longer. Fortunately, the heaven-shrouding formation's formless energy wasn't just suppressing him. It was also suppressing the other foreign race's god kings, greatly weakening their strength. Ji Tianxing stimulated his potential and unleashed 120% of his strength. He finally escaped from the encirclement. Dao Xingyun chased after him relentlessly and kept attacking him. The 400 or so god kings followed behind as well. They pursued relentlessly until their last breath. Ji Tianxing felt a headache coming on, but he didn't have a good solution. After thinking about it, he decided to continue stalling for time and lengthen the battle line before trying to defeat them one by one. The so-called defeat them one by one referred to him exhausting Dao Xingyun to death first. When Dao Xingyun's strength was exhausted and his avatar collapsed, he would deal with the Heavenly Strategy Region Lord and the few hundred god kings. This was the only way out. However, it had to be built on the basis that he had sufficient divine power and a strong foundation. From the current situation, the success rate was less than 20%. At this moment, Burial of Heaven's voice sounded in his mind. "This can't go on. I have a suggestion." Seeing that Burial of Heaven had thought of a solution, Ji Tianxing hurriedly used his divine perception to ask, "What idea do you have?" Burial of Heaven didn't waste any time. He said in a low voice, "I will stay. You lure Dao Xingyun away. After the battle line is lengthened, I will attack with everyone and ambush those god kings. Ji Tianqing understood immediately. Burial of Heaven was referring to Yunyao Jiku Bai Feng and the others when he said, everyone. By doing this he wanted to split the battlefield into two and defeat them one by one. This idea is feasible, but it's also very dangerous. Although these god kings are weak, there are too many of them. I'm afraid you won't be able to hold them off. Ji Tianqing frowned and said worriedly. Burial of Heaven said firmly, this is the most suitable and most promising method. Don't worry, I will do my best to protect everyone. Once they can't hold on, I will bring them away in time. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and agreed. He used his divine perception to inform Yunyao Jiku and the others and told them the plan. Yunyao Jiku and the others had fought a huge battle previously. They had lost some of their strength and suffered injuries of varying degrees. But now 4 hours had passed in the outside world. They had been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 8 days. Everyone's injuries and strength had recovered by 80% to 90%. They could fight again. After hearing Ji Tianqing's plan, everyone agreed. Hence, Ji Tianqing and Dao Xingyun exchanged 2 moves and pretended that Burial of Heaven's sword had been sent flying. The divine sword rolled and smashed thousands of miles away. It turned into a ray of black light and fell from the sky. Then it disappeared and hid in an alternate space.